It was only when I was admitted to the Yenjing Institute of History that I realized. The first year of the archaeology program focuses on archaeological excavation, the second year on live ammunition shooting, and the third year is about building courage. What they call building courage is when we have black cloths tied over our eyes and are driven to a remote area in a truck, in the middle of nowhere. We were thrown into an ancient tomb, one by one. Each of us was given a knife, a flashlight, and a gun with only 6 bullets. At first, none of us took it seriously, until a tentacle dragged someone away, right in front of us. We realized this wasn't a drill. We were just fledgling students. Why use death to temper us? What dynasty's tomb is this? What kind of tomb guardian was that tentacle just now? What's its weakness? No one told me any of these details beforehand. I'm trying to stay calm. I'm rapidly searching through the knowledge I learned at school. The ceiling of the tomb has openwork caisson patterns. It must be from the Jin dynasty. Those tentacles look like the thousand-hand Rakshasa, recorded in Jin dynasty folklore. Its only weakness is its fear of light. I saw the flashlight scattered on the ground, dropped by my panicked classmates, and a plan immediately came to mind. The result of that test was 13 deaths and 1 survivor. I was the only one who fought the thousand-hand Rakshasa to the end. When I crawled out of the ancient tomb, covered in wounds, I saw a pair of armed archaeological experts, ready to rescue me. Only then did I realize that tomb 1102 was a test. But when it was first excavated, all dangers had already been cleared. It was used to test the new recruits. Unfortunately, the thousand-handed Rakshasa we encountered had just awakened. So this trial became hellishly difficult. The first thing the dean said to me was, "You've been chosen by them. They'll come to get you tomorrow." I didn't know what that meant at the time. The next day, a man calling himself Old Jiang really did come to the school to find me. "I hear you're the sole survivor of tomb 1102. You have 2 paths you can choose. 1, forget everything that happened yesterday. After graduation, Dean Kai will arrange a teaching position for you, and you can live an ordinary life. 2, join us. Although every second you'll be close to death, you'll have the chance to see national treasures you've never seen before. You'll also see the truly mysterious side of this world." For a moment, I didn't know how to respond. I could only timidly ask, "Who are you people?" Old Jiang hesitated for a few seconds, then revealed a strange black knife at his waist and asked, "Have you heard of the Qilin?" When I hear this word, I can't help but gasp. There is a legend in the field of archaeology. On the land of China, there is a mysterious organization called the Qilin. Its main task is to explore and protect China's national treasures. Every member of the organization is a top-tier expert. Ordinary members are called silver bells. Elite members are called sprites. The top E possess exclusive black blades. They're called black blade Qilins. I never thought Qilins actually existed. The man in front of me wore one, a gleaming black blade at his waist. "Are you a black blade Qilin?" I stammered. But Old Jiang didn't answer. He just smiled and opened the car door for me. Although I hadn't explicitly told him my choice, he already knew the answer from the longing in my eyes. After the car started, the curtains immediately closed automatically. Clearly, he didn't want me to know where we were going. I wasn't surprised by this, but I still wondered why they chose me. Even if I survive the trial, I won't be considered an expert. After my repeated questioning, Old Jiang finally revealed the truth. The Qilin organization has 108 members. They only recruit new members under special circumstances. Old Jiang lit a cigarette, took a long drag, and said, 6 months ago, my apprentice was torn apart by a golden-haired corpse. Because I underestimated the level of that tomb. The Qilin clan always has 108 members. So you replaced him. From now on, you are my apprentice. We didn't speak after that. We drove for a day and a night. I woke up to find the car stopped in the middle of nowhere. After getting out, I saw a 4-story building. There were no signs or departmental names. It stood in the wilderness like a lonely tombstone. The moment I entered the building, I was stunned. The inside of the ordinary-looking building had been completely renovated. It not only had a Western-style elevator but also an automatic underground car lift. The entire building is filled with the sound of telegrams. The building is the intelligence department. It is equivalent to the ears of the Qilin. Any discovery of an ancient tomb is immediately reported here. The intelligence officers quickly assess the danger level of the tomb. They rate it as A, B, C, or D. This helps determine which level of Qilin member should be sent. There are even S-level tombs. This type of tomb will trigger the Black Blade Qilin. Follow Old Jiang up the stairs. The second floor is the archive room. It's equivalent to the Qilin's brain. The books are almost all unique copies. They contain information on ancient tombs, dragon-seeking manuals, and the Qilins. Classified files on handling paranormal incidents. The third floor is where the Qilin members live. Old Jiang didn't take me to see the fourth floor. He said the fourth floor is the Qilin organization's top secret. Newcomers like me aren't qualified to go up there. Later, Old Jiang gave me a change of clothes, and arranged a small dorm room for me to get familiar with the environment before leaving. But no one ever told me what I'm here for. Everyone in the entire building is busy with their own things. I'm just like air. I asked everyone about old Jiang's whereabouts, but no one answered me. Weeks later, old Jiang still hadn't appeared. I just holed up in the archives on the second floor, spending day and night poring over classified documents. The old man in the archives knew I was with old Jiang, and didn't stop me. From these documents, I discovered some earth-shattering secrets. In 1921, a torrential downpour struck the Hailang River. A 10-meter-long dragon-like creature was stranded. After being discovered by local fishermen, the Kirin group immediately dispatched personnel to cordon off the area, and released the Jiaolong. They followed the Jiaolong's escape route and found the North Sea Dragon Orb. In 1925, an unnamed ancient tomb was unearthed in Yunzhou. The archaeological team, unaware of the dangers, ended up releasing a group of Zishuangbana bronze warriors. The entire team was wiped out. Fortunately, Kirin arrived in time, and struck 9 Earth Eyes, disabling the feng shui seal of the Bronze Gate. In 1930, Tomb Raider Yang Yangon publicly killed the guards, and plundered the Qing Imperial Mausoleum. He also attempted to smuggle the artifacts out of the country. The next day, Yang Yongan's heart was removed, and the treasure was delivered to the Beiping Museum completely intact. There were many such incidents. Surprisingly, they were all carried out by Qilin. Old Jiang even personally led the team in several of these incidents. I saw his name at the bottom right corner of the file, Jiang Donghu. In the blink of an eye, I've been under house arrest in this small building for 2 weeks. I still hadn't seen old Jiang, just repeating eating, sleeping, and looking at documents. I muddled through a month like this, until one night, I was studying documents in the archives, when old Jiang suddenly appeared and found me. He told me to quickly pack some clothes, and go somewhere with him. Excitedly, I returned to my room. I grabbed a few things casually and then happily followed him out. Before we left, old Jiang took out a wrinkled piece of paper and handed it to me. It only had one line written on it, Xiushui Village District. The handwriting was sloppy, as if written in a hurry. On the back of the paper, however, there was a note that sent shivers down my spine. It was a large, blood-red S. I'm just a newbie. Why do I have to execute an S-level mission? You know, the thousand-hand Rakshasa we barely managed to defeat was only C-level. My excitement just now completely vanished. I couldn't help but question old Jiang. Have you taken on a lot of apprentices? Then you'd get them all killed. Old Jiang didn't say anything. He just looked at his Swiss watch and said, time is short. I'll explain on the way. So I was tricked by old Jiang onto the train. He pulled out a stack of documents and told me to read them and give him my opinion. As the whistle blew, I began to understand how this all started. Months ago, a heavy rain poured down on Xiushui village for 7 days and 7 nights. It triggered a mudslide on the back mountain. But the mudslide wasn't the normal earthy yellow, it was blood red. Even stranger, after a flash of lightning, the mudslide washed down a jet-black coffin. The villagers shouted bad luck, but couldn't help but be curious and gathered around. Under the village chief's direction, everyone worked together to pry open the coffin. To their surprise, there were no bones inside. Only heavy copper coins and some jewelry. Xiushui village is a well-known poor village in western Fujian. Every household struggles to have meat even once a year, so they decided to take a risk and sell the copper coins and jewelry from the coffins. They learned from the antique dealer that these coins were called Kaiyuan coins, and a string of them could be exchanged for 10 silver dollars. So the villagers believed this was a gift from heaven. Soon after, another coffin washed down from the mountain. This time, in addition to copper coins, there were also gold ingots. Then a third coffin appeared. This information was gathered later by Qilin's informant. The informant didn't know what was in the third coffin. He only knew that after the third coffin was opened, Xiushui village completely lost contact with the outside world. The antique traffickers, sensing something was wrong, went into the mountains to search. They discovered an extremely strange scene in the village. More than 50 houses in the entire village were empty, including the poultry and livestock. All were gone without a trace. The trafficker, knowing something about these taboos, didn't dare to stay. While escaping on horseback, he encountered the village chief's son, Kong Ergu, but he had gone insane. From time to time, he screamed about ghosts. Face ghosts. They're coming to get me. Word of this spread quickly. The Qilin informants confirmed the appearance of rare brine-cured meats in Xiushui village. That's why they urgently reported it. After reading the intelligence, I shook my head. There were too few clues. I couldn't see the feng shui dragon veins of the mountain. There were no photos of the coffin either. The so-called characteristics of the white-faced ghost were also unclear. My informant was scared witless, and didn't even dare go near Xiushui village. Old Jiang looked disappointed. I quickly added, based on the current information, we can safely assume that the coins in the coffin are Kaiyuan Tongbao. This means the tomb must date back to around the Tang dynasty. During the Tang dynasty, western Fujian was a wasteland, so the tomb owner might have been an exiled official. The mudslide was blood red. The coffin appeared after the lightning strike. It is suspected that the tomb contains Ganoderma. The first 2 coffins were deliberately used as bait. to provoke the greed of the villagers. The third coffin is the truly terrifying one. It's the white-faced ghost that Kong Ergu saw, but I really don't know what the white-faced ghost is. I've almost worn out the books in the archive. If there were similar cases, I would definitely remember them. I even suspect he doesn't even know what a Qilin is. The unknown is what people fear the most. That's why they would elevate this seemingly simple disappearance case to an S-level event. They even sent you, the Black Blade Qilin. As soon as I finished speaking, old Jiang clapped his hands with a smile. I thought I misjudged you. You're smarter than I expected, but you guessed one thing wrong. They didn't just send me a black knife. Another black knife, Qilin, will meet us at Shoshui village. So don't worry too much. My cheek twitched. 2 black Kirin dispatched at the same time. This is more serious than I thought. The train finally stopped at Manhwa County. The first thing old Jiang did after getting off the train was go to the market and buy a tortoiseshell cat. I asked him what he bought it for. He said it was for me, for protection, but I hope I don't have to use it. After saying that, he shoved the cat into my arms. Shoshui village is still more than 10 kilometers away. We planned to rent a carriage, but as soon as they heard it was Shoshui village, several coachmen immediately ran off in terror. Old Jiang forcibly grabbed and held one of them. The coachman explained with a grimace, "Brother, it's not that I don't want to take you, it's just that the place is haunted. These past few days, several groups of outsiders have come to our county, all specifically asking to go to that place. But after they went, all of them disappeared without a trace. Last night, that old horse came back dragging the cart, but the carriage was empty, except for 7 bloody severed arms. That mountain eats people. I advise you not to tempt fate." No matter how much we asked him after that, the driver wouldn't say a word. He was clearly still terrified. In the end, old Jiang decided to buy his carriage for double the price. I drove the cart to Shoshui village myself. On the way, old Jiang asked me what information I got from the groom. I thought for a moment and said, "There's news about an ancient tomb hidden in Shoshui village. I'm afraid it's already been leaked. Those several groups of outsiders must be tomb robbers, but it seems like they've suffered heavy losses. We can still make it there in time." Old Jiang nodded with satisfaction. After riding in the carriage for several hours, 2 towering mountains finally appeared before us. The 2 mountains resembled 2 Buddha hands, holding up the village of Shoshui between them. Buddha's hands upholding, grasping the Kuei star. This was originally a very auspicious feng shui formation, but everything before my eyes now exudes a strange aura. Dark clouds shroud the 2 peaks. Below the halfway point, the trees are lush and green, but above the halfway point, they're all withered. The air is thick with the smell of blood. This place, once blessed and destined to produce brilliant scholars, has now become a desolate wasteland. Because of the terrible road conditions, we could only leave the cart behind and hike up the mountain. Following the scent of blood, we quickly found a small cave halfway up the mountain. The cave looked like the giant mouth of a monster, devouring all the surrounding sunlight. Even when I pulled out my flashlight, I couldn't see what was inside. This made me feel a sense of dread. And then, a strange, eerie laugh came from inside the cave. What should I do? I looked at Lao Jiang for help, but he pointed to the cave, gesturing for me to go in first. I could only draw a dagger and hold it in front of me, carefully going inside with my flashlight. The cave was full of broken bricks. It must have been where the mountain patrol used to live. Since Shoshui village was massacred, it has been abandoned. But what about the laughter deep inside the cave? Just as I was pondering this, I was suddenly startled by what appeared before me. I saw that on both walls of the cave, there were red human faces of all sizes drawn with blood. Some were smiling, while others were screaming with their mouths wide open. These faces are drawn very abstractly, like the skill level of a 3-year-old, but they inexplicably give me a sense of dread. At the same time, that strange laughter appeared again. I took a deep breath, and looked around with my flashlight. Suddenly, a pale face appeared in front of me. It was a man crawling on the ground with both his hands and feet, grayish, just like a 4-legged snake. It just stared at me and smiled. Its off-white teeth opened and closed as it said, "Are you looking for me?" I almost peed my pants. Luckily, old Jiang was right behind me. He kicked it away. Later, I found out, this man is Kong Ergu, the sole survivor of Shoshui village. Look at the whip marks on his face, and the ropes tied around his legs. He was likely severely interrogated by the tomb raiders who entered the mountains. But I suspect those tomb raiders wasted their time, because this guy in front of me has genuinely lost his mind. No matter what I ask him, his only response is a creepy laugh, until old Jiang took out a white pill, and fed it to Kong Ergu. Kong Ergu stopped giggling. The pill seemed to have a strong sedative effect, but it didn't last long. So old Jiang questioned him quickly. He first pointed at the wall and asked, "Did you draw all these faces?" Kong Ergu replied, "It was me. I drew it. Where are all the villagers of Shoshui village? Why are you the only one here? Dad, Auntie, and Xiaohua are all dead. So much blood. Bloody face, don't come and get me." Kong Ergu seemed to have thought of something terrifying. He crawled into a corner of the cave and curled up. Old Jiang dragged him out again. One last question. You've seen the white face, haven't you? Tell me what it looks like. No. I don't know. Perhaps the last question was too stimulating. Kong Ergu let out another strange laugh. Even another pill didn't help. Old Jiang sighed and said, "It seems we can only use the last resort. Make sure you hold Kong Ergu down, no matter what." What happened next made Black Blade Qilin even more mysterious in my eyes. Because Old Jiang actually pulled 2 silver needles out of his wallet. He moved extremely quickly. In the blink of an eye, the 2 needles were already lodged in Kong Ergu's neck. Meanwhile, Old Jiang's fingers were gently twisting the needle tails. Faint white smoke rose between his fingers. His complexion alternated between red and blue. It looked as if he was channeling internal energy, like in a wuxia novel. In that instant, Kong Ligo's eyes regained their shine. It was as if my lost soul had returned. Old Jiang unfolded a piece of blank paper in front of Kong Erdog. He handed him a pen and said anxiously, "Quick, draw the pale face you saw." This trick was ingenious. Kong Erdog actually obeyed Old Jiang's order, except he didn't use the pen. It was like drawing a ghost face on the wall. He bit his finger and used the blood to scribble. At this moment, time became particularly long, until finally, Kong Ergu collapsed to the ground with a thud. Old Jiang then removed the silver needles, gasping for breath. I picked up the drawing, the blood still wet. In an instant, I felt like I had been thrown into an icy cave in the depths of winter. Is Kong Ergu drawing a ghost? On the clean white paper, he sketched a triangular, ball-shaped face. The face had no eyes or nose, only bright red lips, just like the paper effigies made during the ghost festival in the countryside. I don't know if it's my imagination, but even though it clearly has no eyes, I feel like it's staring at me with countless pairs of resentful eyes. It was as if it wanted to stare into my heart. Old Jiang's expression was also very grim. He said he needed to rest outside the cave to regain his strength. I asked, "Is it really that powerful?" Old Jiang nodded. Then he took out a delicate silver revolver, and fired a burst of red cold fireworks into the sky. This must be the legendary flare gun. Old Jiang took a hard drag on his cigarette and cursed. "We need to get fourth sister here ASAP. Otherwise, we're both gonna die in this hellhole." That's when I learned. That pale-faced thing was a once-in-a-century blood fiend. A freshly risen blood fiend is like a skinned corpse, only capable of simple attacks and hunting movements. But as it consumes more and more blood, it will slowly grow new skin and facial features. Its power will also rapidly increase. Therefore, this blood fiend didn't reveal itself at first, but instead exploited the greed of the Xiushui villagers, tricking them into opening the coffin, to slowly drain the entire village's blood and increase its power. Now, it has already grown skin and a mouth. If both the nose and eyes grow out, we're probably just one step away from the Corpse King. I asked Old Jiang, "Is the fourth sister you're talking about the other black sword Kirin?" "That's right. The fourth sister's sword is the nemesis of this thing. Once she arrives, we'll have a 90% chance of success." Just as I was talking to Old Jiang, a vicious meow suddenly echoed from the cave. I immediately thought of the tortoiseshell cat I left inside. Oh no, something's happened. Old Jiang reacted faster than me. He tossed his cigarette and rushed into the cave. By the time I fumbled my flashlight on, I saw the cat we brought up the mountain with its fur standing on end, staring with wide, copperbell eyes. He snarled ferociously in one direction, and in that direction, Kong Ergu was found hanged by a hemp rope. His tongue was lolling out, but there was a smile on his face. How could this be? How could a madman do this in front of 2? He died right under our noses. After examining the body, Old Jiang declared, "That thing must have just been here." It bewitched Kong Ergu, enticing him to kill himself. But that thing was just too fast. Only this little guy saw it. Old Jiang pointed at the golden, mottled cat wearing a hat. I suddenly understood. "So you bought it." Turns out it was for this feature. At that moment, I raised another question. Since that blood demon could handle Kong Ergu, why didn't it just take care of us too? Old Jiang pointed to his head and told me, "Because it has intelligence. It knows we're harder to deal with than Kong Ergu. Have you heard of the cat and mouse game?" Old Jiang's words made my face fall. "So, the blood fiend wants to slowly play with our lives," Old Jiang said with a serious expression. "It won't let anyone leave the mountain alive. We need to find its lair quickly. This blood fiend isn't fully formed yet. It still returns to the tomb every night to absorb the essence of moonlight. That was when it was at its weakest." Then we took the cat and set off again. We quickly arrived at Xiushui village. The entire village matched the description in the intel exactly. It was truly a deserted village. Old Jiang and I went door to door, opening each house. As expected, we couldn't find a single person. And at the back of the village, we found the blood-red river formed by the mudslide. The river was so red I couldn't see the bottom. It gave off a pungent, bloody smell. I found a glass bottle, and was about to fill it with the water, to study what this red substance was. Suddenly, Old Jiang yelled at me, "Don't move," as he looked at my feet. I carefully looked down and discovered, there's a strange line of footprints in the mud here. And judging by the tread, they're not the villagers' cloth shoes. Old Jiang crouched down and took a look. These are warrior brand hiking boots. The kind grave robbers wear. Let's keep quiet when we go up the mountain. They should be lurking around the ancient tomb. I couldn't help but ask. But what about this bloody water? And what about the missing villagers? Are we going to look for the tomb without figuring this out? Old Jiang looked at me with a smile and replied, "You'll understand everything when you reach the top." With 1,000 doubts, I followed Old Jiang and climbed the mountain along the mudflats beside the bloody river. The mountain path was already steep and winding. Plus, the mudslide damage forced me to use the grappling hook and climbing rope in my backpack. But when I looked up, I realized Old Jiang was actually moving swiftly up the steep slope. I've only seen such skill in martial arts novels. He truly deserves the name Black Blade Qilin. By the time Old Jiang was sitting leisurely on the summit, smoking a cigarette, I had just climbed up, drenched in sweat. When I stood at the mountaintop overlooking the river of blood below, my eyes nearly popped out of my head. With the sun's powerful penetration, I saw the riverbed piled high with bodies. These bodies were all twisted into grotesque postures, raising their pale hands, as if pleading for help. This scene was truly terrifying. I didn't expect the villagers of Shoshui village, who mysteriously disappeared, to be lying in the bottom of the blood river. This blood river made them a fortune, but also became their grave. After half an hour of rest, we continued to explore deeper into the mountain. The information said that a thunderbolt struck open that tomb, and the rubble beneath our feet was already. There are burn marks from lightning strikes. We must be close to the ancient tomb, but the closer we get, the more careful we have to be, because there's a high probability that a group of tomb raiders is lurking nearby. Speak of the devil. Less than 100 meters further, we saw a huge blood-red cave. The cave was surrounded by collapsed rubble. The terrifying thing is, bloody water is still gurgling out of the hole. This is the source of that monstrous river of blood. At this moment, a dozen figures are gathered beside the cave. Each of them has a curved blade or a musket tucked behind their waist. This group has probably been here for 2 days, because there are 2 tents pitched nearby. Old Jiang and I are hiding behind a pile of rocks. We can vaguely see several injured people lying inside the tents. These wounded all had pale faces, and groaned from time to time. What I found strange was that their injuries were all missing half an arm, either left or right. It reminded me of that scary story the coachman told. A driverless carriage returned in the middle of the night, carrying a cart full of bloody severed arms. After observing for a while, I noticed the tomb raiders seemed to be having a disagreement. A burly man spoke up. "Boss Chang, this tomb is a death trap. We've been working for 2 days and 2 nights with heavy casualties. You still want to force us in? Isn't that a little unconscionable?" The fierce-looking man at the front shouted, "Shut up. Going back empty-handed. How am I supposed to face the families of my dead brothers? If anyone dares to desert, I'll shoot him dead." He slammed a Mauser pistol onto the ground. The diagonal scar on his face instantly silenced the bandits. But soon, the group of thieves became panicked again, because one of their comrades, who had just been thrown into the hole, came out. He was pulled back by 2 people, stationed at the hole's entrance using a safety rope. At this moment, he had become a blood-soaked mess, crying out in agony as he rolled on the ground, like the wounded in the tent. Both of his arms were also gone. I looked at Lao Jiang with fear in my eyes. "Is this tomb haunted? Why does everyone who goes in break their arms?" Lao Jiang smiled and told me, "This should be a narrow and long tomb passage. It's surrounded by natural basalt. The tomb robbers' tools can't widen the passage at all, so only one person can go down at a time." I thought, this has nothing to do with a severed arm. Old Jiang told me not to rush. He guessed that. There's a door at the end of the tomb passage. The door is equipped with a kind of mechanism lock called Zimu Yin Yang. Every time you unlock it, you have to put your hand into a hidden slot on the door. If you make a mistake, you'll suffer the pain of a severed arm. It's the masterpiece of a mechanism master from the 5 dynasties and 10 kingdoms period. So what's inside is very likely a later Tang dynasty tomb. And he told me before I go in, I must review the Tang dynasty mechanisms in my mind. I couldn't help but admire old Jiang's sharp eyes. He's still outside the tomb, but he could see through the entire tomb with just one clue. But wait, what did his last sentence mean? We're surrounded by ruthless tomb raiders. How are we supposed to get in? Old Jiang seemed to see the confusion in my eyes. We go straight in, of course. With that, he jumped out of our hiding spot with a smile. These tomb raiders were extremely alert. In an instant, 4 or 5 gleaming blades were pressed against old Jiang's neck. "Hey, you in the back, come out too." Big Boss Jiang suddenly pulled out his gun and pointed it at me. I could only raise my hands and cautiously walk out. I cursed in my heart. "Old Jiang, oh, Old Jiang, you've really gotten me into trouble." Big Boss Jiang ordered his men to tie us both up tightly. Just starting the interrogation. "Who are you two? Why did you come to Shoshui village? How did you find this place?" Old Jiang didn't bother to answer a word. He just gestured for Big Head Jiang to check his watch. "What time is it?" Big Head Jiang opened his pocket watch and said, 6 p.m. Old Jiang nodded. "You've got 2 hours left to live." Old Zhang's arrogant tone. Even I couldn't stand it, let alone Big Boss Zhang. Big Boss Zhang swiftly pressed his gun against my forehead. If you can't explain yourself today, I'll shoot your son first. At this moment, I can't even cry. This old man is messing with you. Why are you shooting me? And I'm really not his son. Old Zhang calmly said. In another hour, it will be dark. The blood fiends will return to their nest to absorb the moonlight. Do you think your petty skills can handle the blood demon? Blood demon. Boss Zhang gulped. Don't scare me. A river of blood overflows. Not even a chicken or dog is spared. If you haven't even heard of this saying, then you, Zhang Yilong, don't deserve to be the chief. How do you know my name is Zhang Yilong? Zhang Dabatu's face changed dramatically. I not only know your name is Zhang Yilong, I also know who cut off one of your fingers on your right hand. There's no treasure in this tomb. There's only a blood fiend that's almost fully formed. While there's still time, take your brother and leave quickly. Old Zhang said as he revealed the black short knife at his waist. You are the Qilin, the black knife Qilin. Zhang Daba's pupils rapidly constricted. If you don't leave now, she might get angry. Old Zhang suddenly looked up with a smile, gazing into the distance. It was at this moment that everyone realized that a black-clad woman, radiating killing intent, was standing by the blood-stained hole behind them, though they didn't know when she had arrived. The woman was holding a sword, her beauty like a brushstroke of ink on paper. Her face was obscured by a black veil, so it was impossible to make out her features. But her eyes were as deep as eternity. The unmelted snow-capped mountains are as cold and stern. She also had a black short sword strapped to her waist. Obviously, she is the other Black Blade Qilin who came to meet with old Zhang. I don't know why. When Zhang Dabato saw this woman, he was more frightened than seeing the king of hell. He quickly cut the ropes off me and old Zhang. He cupped his fists towards us. With a dozen or so tomb raiders, he carried the injured, and slunk down the mountain. Old Zhang grinned and tried to flatter the woman in black. Fourth sister, now that you're here, I can relax. The woman in black only let out a cold snort, then looked at me. This is your new apprentice. This young man seems much more reliable than you. After a conversation, I learned that the woman in black is called He Lanxue, the fourth-ranked Black Blade Qilin. The sword in her hand is called Yehua, the bane of all Jiangshi in the world. It was she who cut off Zhang Dabatu's thumb. He Lanxue is actually only a few years younger than old Zhang, but she looks like she's very well preserved. Her skin is fair and her features are delicate. She carries an air of coldness. And for some reason, no matter how much she scolds old Zhang, he just scratches the back of his head, as if he were a primary school student in front of his homeroom teacher. While He Lanxue led the way into that bloody hole, I quietly poked old Zhang from behind and asked, do you like her? Old Zhang immediately clapped a hand over my mouth, nearly suffocating me. You little brat, do you have a death wish? There was someone in the Qilin group before. He only said that fourth sister was his type, and he was stabbed and sent to the hospital. I quickly shut up, but I'm still sure old Zhang likes He Lanxue. When someone likes another person, the way they look at them is different. The three of us stepped through the thick blood into the cave. The entire blood cave was pitch black. By the weak light of my flashlight, I saw all sorts of terrifying little figures carved into the tomb passage walls. Each one was ghastly, with bulging eyes and bared teeth. This was unlike any ancient tomb I'd ever seen. Most tomb passages are perfectly straight, to facilitate the tomb owner's soul ascending to heaven. But this tomb was winding, and carved with so many ominous figures. It's more like some kind of mysterious ritual, or maybe it's to suppress something. And just as old Zhang predicted, there really is a bronze door at the end of the tomb passage. On the door is a tomb-guarding beast I've never seen before. The sound of ticking mechanisms constantly emanates from within. There are only two small holes outside the door, just big enough for someone to reach in and unlock it. The two holes above were already splattered with fresh blood. Below, there was a row of severed limbs left behind in haste. Just as I was struggling with how to open the door, old Zhang smiled and casually reached his hand inside. I anxiously shouted out, but old Zhang calmly turned back and said, don't worry, there's no lock in this world I can't open. With Lao Zhang's manipulation, the sound of the mechanism inside the door grew faster and more urgent. It was clear that the blade inside the mechanism was rapidly descending, but Lao Zhang remained as steady as a mountain. Suddenly, with a sharp sound, just a few centimeters away from Lao Zhang's arms, a sharp blade stopped just in time. Then, the tomb door slowly opened in front of us. A long-lost glimmer of light appeared. It turned out there was a row of statues of palace maids holding lanterns inside the tomb. The light was emanating from the ever-burning lamps. Old Zhang brushed the dust off his sleeves. He gestured that we could enter. My admiration for old Zhang grew. How deeply must one understand these mechanisms to be like him? He Lanxue noticed my surprise. You'll learn all his skills later on. You'll be able to learn everything he can do. I nodded. Then, speechless, I pointed ahead. What kind of tomb is this? In the main chamber before us, the walls were all covered in cinnabar, malachite. A colorful mural painted with blue malachite seems to depict a general's life, from his youth battling on the field, to his middle age reaching the highest rank, all the way to his death from illness and his burial. But in the middle, there's a bottomless pit, filled with blood. Bubbles keep rising to the surface, as if it's constantly boiling. The blood pit extends in 3 directions, south, east, and west, surrounding the 3 stone platforms. But the 3 burial coffins on the platforms have vanished without a trace. They must be the 3 coffins swept down the mountain by the flood. The first 2 contained gold, silver, and jewels, and the last one hid the blood curse. Above the pit of blood, a main coffin is suspended in midair. The main coffin is hung by 3 bronze chains as thick as an arm. It is inverted, hanging down from the tomb's ceiling. Clearly, this is another seal. What exactly did the tomb's master do? How did he go from being an ancient general to a restless, cursed traitor? At this moment, Lan Xue furrowed her brows and asked, "How long until 7 o'clock?" Lao Jiang looked at his watch. "Less than half an hour. Everyone, take cover. We'll take out that blood specter first. Otherwise, we can't take anything from the tomb." As soon as Lan Xue finished speaking, Lao Jiang gently closed the tomb door. Then he pulled a large bag of rice grains from his pocket and scattered them on the ground. "This is aged glutinous rice, over 10 years old." Then, old Jiang and Lan Xue exchanged a glance. They both jumped onto the crossbeam at the top of the tomb. I looked at them anxiously. "You two can move effortlessly across walls and roofs. But what about me?" Finally, old Jiang told me to hide behind the sacrificial platform, and sternly warned me, "Remember, no matter what you see or hear later, don't expose yourself. This isn't a fight you can participate in." I nodded and immediately crouched behind the altar, looking towards the tomb entrance. I was nervous, yet also strangely expectant. Time passed second by second. The hour of 7 was drawing closer. Suddenly, I saw old Jiang on the beam pull out half of his black knife. Lan Xue, who had been keeping her eyes closed in deep thought, suddenly opened her eyes. I immediately realized that the ghostly thing had arrived. Sure enough, a chilling laugh began to approach. The laughter drifted through the tomb passage, first from the left, then from the right. I couldn't help but stick half my head out, wanting to see what this legendary blood specter looked like. Then, through the crack between the 2 tomb doors, I saw a pale, pointed face appear. The face was perfectly smooth, although it had no eyes, but I could feel it staring intently at me. I stared back, wide-eyed. We were locked in this stalemate for a few seconds. Finally, I couldn't hold back a scream. Lao Jiang shouted down from the rafters, "It's seen you. Run. Go deeper inside." I didn't think twice. Just jumped up and ran. But as I ran, something felt off. This main tomb chamber is sealed, with only one entrance. Where was I even running to? I turned around and realized that the blood fiend had been drawn to me. Both feet stepped onto the glutinous rice that old Jiang had just laid out. Immediately, a horrific scream rang out. I immediately understood. Old Jiang left me down here as bait, using my living breath to lure this ghostly thing. At that moment, I wished I could unleash all the curse words I'd accumulated over the past 20 years. But then I heard old Jiang shout, "Get down!" quick as lightning. Old Jiang and Lan Xue drew their blades simultaneously. 2 figures crossed behind Blood Fiend in a blur. In that instant it was as if the wind stopped. The light stopped. Time itself stood still. A cross-shaped, snow-bright blade flashed like lightning in the dark, tearing open Blood Fiend's back. Xuesha let out a shrill howl. Dark red pus oozed from the wound on its back. The smell was incredibly foul, but this seemingly fatal blow didn't kill it. Instead, it enraged it. To avoid the sticky rice on the ground, it leaped onto the roof of the tomb. Its blood-red claws dug deep into the rock. Its head spun around grotesquely before locking onto me. I don't understand why this thing keeps targeting me. Wherever I run, it jumps to. What should I do now? Covered in dust, I yelled at Lao Jiang. Lao Jiang immediately yelled back, "Let the cat out." I then remembered I still had a cat in my backpack, so I quickly opened my backpack. Strange as it may seem, this small golden tabby Maclay's cat wasn't afraid of the blood fiend at all. Its fur bristled, and it roared at the blood fiend, like a tiger charging down a mountain. I took the opportunity to get up and try to run back to old Jiang, but as soon as I looked up, I saw old Jiang yelling, "Go where the glutinous rice is. Don't look back." Old Jiang's warning came too late. I turned around and was face to face with that blood fiend. In a daze, I felt my body getting lighter and lighter, as if my soul was about to leave my body. The blood fiend's face clearly had no eyes, but I saw a pair of eyes with infinite magic power. Just when I thought I was about to become its prey, a crisp and powerful unsheathing sound suddenly echoed in the tomb. A long sword mercilessly pierced the heart of the blood specter. It was Lan Xue. She was still in a one-kneeled position, holding the sword in one hand, cold and elegant with a touch of heroism, and the part of the blood specter that was pierced seemed to be ignited. Clusters of black flames erupted, eventually burning the thing into a withered skeleton. No wonder old Jiang said Shue's sword is the bane of the blood fiend. This is the meaning of the sword's name, Inferno. With the blood fiend dealt with, we can finally open the main coffin without worry. Although this coffin is suspended in midair, it won't pose a problem for the three of us. After I estimated the distance, I used the ropes to create a simple pulley system. I quickly lowered the coffin. The front of the coffin was inscribed with ancient characters. Tomb of the traitor Wen Tao. It was Wen Tao. I was shocked. I never expected that in this godforsaken backwater of western Fujian, to actually find the tomb of this grave-robbing king. Legend has it that Wen Tao was a ghost general during the 5 dynasties and 10 kingdoms period, and the reason he was called a ghost general was because whether he was fighting or just living, he exuded a ghostly aura. He once led his tomb raiders to slaughter their way into Luoyang in a single day and night, saving the emperor at the time. Because of this, he was granted the title of a non-imperial prince. His army never accepts rations from the imperial court. They only march at night. Sometimes passers-by even see them carrying coffins, scattering joss paper, dancing as they march, like an army of ghosts. So the enemy is terrified before they even clash. But the truth is, Wen Tao was a tomb raider. His subordinates were all bandits. So, wherever his digger army went, they would plunder all the tombs, big and small. They stole rare treasures and antiques to fund their army. The emperor turned a blind eye to these activities. After all, who doesn't like a self-funded army? Unfortunately, one day when Tao suddenly fell ill and died, the emperor held a grand funeral for him. That's where his record in the official history ends. However, what illness Wen Tao actually suffered from, and where his tomb-raiding army went after his death, all remain a mystery. After I finished speaking, old Jiang didn't raise any objections. He simply added, "Indeed, this tomb in front of me is full of contradictions. A general who was granted the title of king was instead exiled to this barren land. His tombstone is even inscribed with the word traitor. His coffin is also sealed. What deep hatred could cause this? But I have a strong feeling that if I open the coffin, all questions will be answered." I glanced at Lao Jiang. Lao Jiang was silent for a moment, then said, "Open it." So Lao Jiang and I took out chisels and other tools, and slowly pried along the seams of the coffin lid. It took us more than 10 minutes to kill a blood fiend, but prying open this coffin took nearly an hour, because the coffin was nailed with 28 iron nails. By the time I pried all the nails out, I was drenched in sweat. Old Jiang spoke. "Fourth sister, keep an eye out. These are the 28 constellation soul-binding nails. The person who designed this tomb wanted the deceased to transform into a bloodthirsty spirit. May they never be reborn." Except the flash flood in Shoshui village caused a little accident. His buried wife became a blood fiend first. I asked, "Is this coffin safe now?" "It shouldn't be a problem, but having fourth sister watch over it is more secure." After opening the coffin, none of the catastrophes we anticipated occurred. Inside the coffin was only a desiccated skeleton. Its expression was contorted, mouth agape, as if it had suffered immense despair and torment before death, and on the back of the coffin lid were lines of bloody writing. It was like a death curse from across the millennia. Then, seeing the scratch marks mixed in with the bloody writing, I understood everything. This thousand household, or rather Wen Tao, did not die a natural death. He was nailed inside a coffin and suffocated to death. I ran my hand over the blood-stained characters, and the long-buried secret slowly unfolded. It turns out that in his later years, Wen Tao accidentally found an ancient scroll. It recorded a world-shaking tomb. For him, a former grave robber, this was undoubtedly the greatest challenge of his life. But when he set off with his 10,000 diggers, he also suffered his greatest defeat. The bloody inscription didn't say exactly what happened to him, only that they encountered a curse from the underworld. Thousands of his diggers perished, and Wen Tao himself fell gravely ill. But the more it was like this, the more that tomb held a fatal attraction for Wen Tao. So he even gave up his title as a prince of a different surname, and shut himself away at home, repeatedly simulating methods to break the curse, preparing for his second descent into the tomb. However, when the news reached the emperor's ears, it was transformed into Wen Tao plotting a rebellion. To avoid suspicion, Wen Tao feigned his own death, hoping to escape Luoyang this way. But the emperor was already aware of all this. The emperor personally presided over the funeral, sealing Wen Tao's coffin shut. He was buried in the barren lands of western Fujian. The emperor decreed that this traitor would never be reborn. At the end of the letter written in blood, Wen Tao uttered a vicious curse. He wanted the later Tang dynasty to fall within 2 generations, and indicated that the nameless ancient scroll was in the copper box he carried with him. His precious notes and tomb raiding experiences from that tomb were all marked on the ancient scroll. He hoped that a destined descendant who found their way there could fulfill his wish of raiding the Yin ruins 3 times. "Stop." Old Jiang interrupted me with a surprised tone and asked, "What is the name of that tomb?" "Yin Shu." "What's wrong?" I answered. Old Jiang's expression completely changed. But no matter how much I asked, Old Jiang refused to tell me. The only thing being repeated is one sentence. "Kid, not telling you is for your own good." Helpless, I could only turn my gaze to the copper box in Ganhu's arms. The copper box is square in shape, with intricate patterns carved on each side, but the patterns on each side are chaotic. It's like a scrambled Rubik's Cube. I just don't know why. These jumbled patterns give me a sense of déjà vu. I subconsciously reached out to touch it, but old Jiang stopped me sharply. Don't touch it. This is a rare puzzle box. One wrong move and I'll ruin what's inside. As Lao Jiang carefully prepared to lift out the bronze box, he couldn't help but curse, because even the slightest movement of the bronze plate would shift the chaotic patterns on its surface. Wen Tao truly was the king of tomb raiders. This also meant that the idea of bringing the bronze plate back to Qilin was off the table. We either open it here, either return empty-handed. It seems there really is a mechanism I can't open in this world. Old Jiang sighed. Then, he turned his pleading gaze to He Lanxue. He Lanxue also shook her head. After all, there's only one chance. No one dares to take the risk. But at this moment, that familiar feeling in my heart grew stronger and stronger. As if that bronze painting had been waiting for 1,000 years, just for me to open it. Suddenly, I blurted out, as if possessed. Maybe I can try. Lao Jiang and He Lanxue both gave me incredulous looks. In their eyes, I was just a rookie fresh out of archaeology school. Without waiting for their consent, I started working on it, relying on that incredibly strong telepathic connection. It only took me 5 minutes to reveal the true form of this seemingly uncrackable puzzle. It turns out each side of the bronze box is engraved with a gold-dusted image of a netherworld beast. However, the netherworld beast on each of the 6 sides is different. There's Hundun, Xiongqi, Ji, Taotai, Xiang, Wuziki, and so on. They are all named ferocious beasts from the classic of mountains and seas. These beasts were all circling around a strange, large eye. Something unexpected happened. As the bronze painting was correctly restored, there was a click. The box actually split in half. A cloud of dust burst out, revealing a thick stack of sheepskin scrolls inside. I actually opened it. Kid, how did you manage to do that? At this moment, old Jiang looked at me as if I were a monster. I gave a wry smile and said, if I told you that the pattern on this painting is tattooed on my back, would you believe me? To prove it, I took off my shirt, revealing the 6 writhing beasts tattooed on my back, especially the lifelike eye in the center. Under Lao Jiang's questioning, I'm lost in memories. My hometown is a strange town outside Jiang River, because lightning strikes frequently there. Odd things happen, like oxen and trees being struck dead. So the locals call it Thunder Town. I don't know why, but only my family has lived there for generations. In my memory, very few people in my family ever left, and there are 3 baffling rules. First, every newborn must be tattooed with a mysterious symbol. It's called the 6-headed gold-sprinkled nether beast. Second, everyone, regardless of gender, must retire to the ancestral hall at the age of 40. From then on, they are completely isolated from the world. They can't even see their own children. Third, they cannot marry women from outside the town. They cannot study elsewhere, nor can they work elsewhere. These 3 rules are like 3 heavy chains, binding the Li family to Thunder Town. Some young people didn't believe the superstition. They wanted to go out and experience the world. But within a few years, news of their deaths would trickle back to the town. And without exception, none of them lived past 40. The old clan leader said this is the consequence of defying the rules. Only lightning can protect the Li family from their curse of 40. But I've loved reading since I was a child, and I know these are all feudal superstitions. I even witnessed my own parents, when they turned 40, being dragged into the ancestral hall by several strong men. My parents' heart-wrenching cries filled me with a deep hatred for Legion. So one night, I chose to leave that hateful place. I drifted to Beiping for my studies, and eventually got into the Yanjing Academy of History. Then old Jiang asked me, did anyone in Legion ever tell you the meaning of this tattoo? No. I shook my head. Old Jiang took a deep breath and continued. Now, let me tell you something. This is the insignia of Wen Tao's tomb raiding army. It is said that every time Wen Tao looted a large tomb, he would offer a sacrifice of 6 animals, to appease the wrath of the 6 guardian beasts. The 6 guardian beasts of the tomb are Chaos, Xiongqi, Ji, Taotai, Elephant, and Wuziki. It is precisely these fierce beasts' protection that has allowed Wen Tao to achieve invincibility, as if aided by spirits. The reason I haven't dared to act is because the chance of opening this bronze box is 1 in 10,000. Yet you managed to open it on your first try. It seems you truly have a deep connection with Wen Tao. He Lanxue asked indifferently from the side. What's your name? Li Jinglan. I replied. What surname was Wen Tao granted after he was made king? Li. I blurted out almost immediately. Then it dawned on me. Could the Li family from Thunder Town really be descendants of Wen Tao, the Tomb Raider king? Is that why they have the mysterious insignia of the Digger army tattooed on their backs? Seeing my delayed realization, old Jiang and He Lanxue both smiled faintly. Old Jiang even clapped me on the shoulder. Kid, do you know how important this sheepskin scroll is to Qilin? This time, we really found a treasure. He looked me up and down. It was obvious that I was the treasure. After that, old Jiang stopped talking. Instead, he put on gloves and unfolded the sheepskin scroll from the box. This thick stack of things was actually 1 meter wide and 2 meters long when unfolded. It was covered with dense small characters and patterns. It seems she knows what I'm going to ask. He Lan Shui gently explained beside me. This liquid forms a protective layer that isolates oxygen. Without this protection, if we take the parchment outside the cave, exposing it to strong sunlight would cause it to decay into dust. Old Jiang Chao made 6 copies of the pattern carved on the copper box. Then, he led us out of the blood cave. By the time we came down the mountain, it was already early the next morning. Seeing the distant green mountains shrouded in mist, I asked Old Jiang, "Is that the end of it?" Old Jiang gave a mysterious smile. "The end of what? You just had a dream." Old Jiang told me, "Qilin's people will handle the aftermath. The tomb will be sealed. The bodies in the river of blood will be buried. Xiushui village will be cleaned up completely. A new batch of faces will move in. The outside world will be told that nothing ever happened in Xiushui village." A chilling phrase comes to my mind. This is what they call no body, no crime. He Lan Shui escorted us all the way to Beiping. Then she left on another train. It said she had other missions. Old Jiang watched his 4th sister leave reluctantly. This scene amused me. Turns out this old man has such a cute side. But as soon as he returned to Qilin headquarters, Old Jiang became serious. He whispered a few words to a middle-aged man wearing glasses. The middle-aged man immediately ordered the entire first floor. "Everyone, drop everything. Start looking for clues." The sound of telegraphs clicking filled the floor. This massive intelligence department started working again. Old Jiang and several experts started studying something in a small room. It was the parchment they brought back. I tried to go in several times. I was stopped by the guards at the door, told I had no clearance for top-secret information. I could only continue to idly read, or play with the tortoiseshell cat I brought back. Because this little guy is fierce, and loves to eat meaty bones, I named him Big Tiger. Old Jiang hadn't come out for 3 days and nights. But from time to time, I could hear arguments coming from the cabin, or the sound of cups breaking. What was actually written on the sheepskin scroll? What big problem had they encountered? When I woke up, Old Jiang quickly forced a smile. He asked if I was hungry, if I wanted to eat something. I said, "Do you have doji and fried dough rings?" Not even 10 minutes later, Lao Jiang placed a golden, crispy breakfast in front of me. Looking at Lao Jiang being unusually attentive, I felt a sense of unease. "Master, what's wrong with you?" Old Jiang quickly waved his hand and said, No, you should be my master." I couldn't help but spit out my soy milk. Has he studied those scrolls so much that he's lost his mind? Around noon, Old Jiang appeared again and asked me what I wanted to eat. I rolled my eyes and said, "What if I want hot pot?" Lao Jiang actually got a copper hot pot, 2 large boxes of sliced lamb. He sat there, chopping chives, and eagerly watched me cook the meat. That evening, I said I hadn't had Quanjued roast duck in a while. Lao Jiang just replied, "All right." Then he went to the cafeteria and got me a hot roast duck. Old Jiang's sudden attentiveness gave me a faint sense of impending doom. I spent a strange day like that. The next morning, Old Jiang sneaked into my room. I impatiently asked, "What is it? What exactly do you want me to do?" Old Jiang gave a wry smile and said, "We might need you to take us to Thunder Town." What? I'd rather die than go back to that hellhole. I refused without a second thought, but I quickly noticed the solemn look on Old Jiang's face. So I softened my tone and asked, "Is it because of that parchment? You guys are so capable, can't you decipher it?" Old Jiang said, "Things have taken an unexpected turn. That parchment isn't made of sheepskin, but human skin. The most crucial thing is, when Tao recorded all his experiences in the Yin ruins, and a crucial secret he learned while tomb raiding, using a script that has never appeared in this world before. Kieran researched it for 3 days but couldn't find a dictionary for this script. It's a script specifically used to communicate with ghosts. We call it Chinwen. Leijin is our last hope. If you are really a descendant of that person, then someone from your hometown must recognize this writing." I paused for a moment and nodded. "All right, I can take you back. But you have to agree to 3 conditions. The first condition, from now on, don't hide anything from me anymore." "Hide? What are you referring to?" Old Jiang is still playing dumb with me. I won't put up with it. I'll just come right out and say it. Tell me what Yin Su really is, and everything you know. Regarding my background, Old Jiang said with a forced smile, "My good apprentice, we can slowly talk about these things along the way." I intentionally put on a cold face and said, "I'm starting to get unhappy. I have a bad habit. My memory deteriorates whenever I'm upset." "Leijin? Where's Leijin? Have I been there?" Lao Jiang felt exasperation with me for the first time. He looked at me with an incredibly solemn expression and said, "Do you really want to know? For a newcomer, those who know too much are not far from the underworld." I crossed my legs and replied, "I do as I please." Old Jiang looked at his watch. "Fine. The second floor conference hall in half an hour." After saying that, he turned and left without looking back. He seemed very angry. He slammed the door as he left. It made a loud bang. Watching old Zhang's retreating figure, I sighed. I have to go back to Lasian. Even if old Zhang hadn't asked me, I would have gone alone, because I know very well that only there can I unravel the mystery of my origins. But at the same time, I have a bad feeling. A huge conspiracy awaits me in Thunder Town. This trip is likely a suicide mission, so before I go, I at least want to know what I'm getting into. Half an hour passed quickly. I rushed to the second-floor conference room impatiently. Old Zhang was already waiting for me, sitting in a corner at the long table with a scowl on his face. There was also a middle-aged man in the conference room. His hair was slicked back. His expression was serious. When I entered, the middle-aged man slid a piece of paper across the desk toward me and told me to sign it. I glanced over it. It seemed to be filled with confidentiality clauses, things I couldn't tell anyone. I can't tell my parents or children. I even have to be wary of the brothers I've gone through thick and thin with. It means keeping all the secrets to myself. Old Zhang lit a cigarette and said slowly, I was planning to wait a bit longer, but to take good care of you, little ancestor, I have to let you join the organization early. It all suddenly made sense. So these were all necessary steps to becoming a Qilin. Only by becoming a true Qilin could they tell me the highest secrets. The final step was the oath. My childish voice echoed in the conference hall. I swear, I voluntarily joined the Qilin, and will use my unique abilities to defend the national treasures. No matter how dire the situation, no matter how much blood I shed, China will always be above all else in my heart. After the oath, Lao Jiang pulled down a white screen, and projected a large photograph with a slide projector. The photo was blurry, as if taken hastily from a very, very high place. I could only vaguely make out rolling hills and a square pit. The strange thing is, the longer I stared at the photo, the more I felt like these things formed a bizarre, square human face. This square face was tens of thousands of square meters in size. Where the eyes should be were two enormous black holes, and its mouth formed an ancient door shape, like a giant maw, ready to swallow all life within 50 kilometers into the abyss. I could even hear the sound of bones being crushed. No, it's the face of a ghost. A wave of fear instantly crawled up my spine. I don't know why. I keep feeling like that square, demonic face is smiling at me. In a daze, I saw a group of small, bare-chested figures, holding strange bronze musical instruments, performing a ritual on the demonic face. They stared at me ominously, and waved their hands at me, as if saying, "Come, this is your home." A moment later, I asked, "Where is this?" "This is Yin Su." Old Jiang looked at the beads of sweat on my forehead, and sneered. "What? Just half an hour ago, you were shamelessly forcing me. Are you scared now?" It's only at this moment that I understand that the so-called Yin ruins are not a single tomb. Rather, it's a vast tomb complex, or perhaps, a lost kingdom. The Yin ruins are located in Anyang, Hunan. It was the capital built here by the people of the Shang dynasty. Legend has it that the Shang people were warlike and worshipped ghosts and gods, so they couldn't live without sacrifices. Small sacrifices used livestock. Large sacrifices used living people. Despite this, the Shang dynasty was the first dynasty in Chinese history with written records. It pioneered the Bronze Age. It's a pity that after the Shang dynasty fell, the last Shang king cursed both his enemies and himself for 10,000 years. This caused the capital city to sink permanently underground, becoming what is now known as the ruins of Yin. Old Jiang told me that Qilin went to great lengths to get this photo, borrowing a high-altitude reconnaissance aircraft to take it from 1,000 meters above the clouds. Although it's blurry, it's enough to show how large the Yin ruins are. This is why the entire organization values the Yin ruins so much. As the first dynasty in history, there are countless secrets buried here. However, this is an ominous place, a cursed place. Throughout history, countless tomb raiders, they set their sights on the Yin ruins, but they couldn't find any real population. According to unofficial historical records, there was a man from the Qin dynasty named Feng Li, who led more than 50 bandits into the Yin ruins. Before they even started digging, it was as if they had drunk a potion that disoriented them, and they couldn't find their way. A whole group of people actually starved to death because they got lost. At the end of the Eastern Han dynasty, Cao Cao once sent a tomb raider to investigate the Yin ruins. They dug for 3 days but couldn't find the ancient tomb. They had to return empty-handed. However, even though the tomb raiders had the protection of the tomb token, they couldn't avoid a tragic fate. Some of them gouged out their own eyeballs, while others pulled out their own tongues, or they killed each other, and all met a gruesome end. This was the tomb raiders' only crushing defeat. The ruins of Yin are like a man-eating devil. Whoever enters ends up as just another funerary object. For thousands of years, only one person has ever escaped the ruins of Yin alive. That's my ancestor, the Tomb Raider King, Wen Tao. Although Wen Tao also failed, he found the real entrance. You could say he was the closest anyone has come to Yin Su in thousands of years. If he'd had a little more time, perhaps he really could have opened the gates of Yin Su the second time. Speaking of which, Old Jiang offered his own opinion. He figured since Wen Tao was a grave robber, he must have had multiple hideouts. He wouldn't let the emperor wipe him out completely. He probably had his children escape in advance, with his trusted tomb raiders. Then, after hiding in various places, they eventually settled in present-day Lasian. Although centuries have passed, they still get these tattoos to remind their descendants. They are Wen Tao's descendants. And Wen Tao, along with the human skin scroll filled with secrets, lies quietly in Xiushui village, awaiting his descendants' arrival. To this day, only that human skin scroll records the true entrance to the Yin ruins. What did Wen Tao encounter when he first entered the Yin ruins? What did he see? What kind of curse did he suffer? This intel is also crucial for the Qilin. Exploring this Super S-class tomb is impossible without intel. No matter how many black Qilin we send, it'll just be a suicide mission. So you must take me to Lasian. Let us know what's written on the human skin scroll. This is not just my order, but also the order of the Qilin's supreme leader. I'm still in deep shock. Lao Jiang wasn't rushing me. He just waited quietly for my answer. I sat there quietly for a while, before finally looking up and saying to Lao Jiang, I think the sooner the better. Let's leave tomorrow morning. But now I need to use my second condition. On the way to Lei Town, you must follow my arrangements. I need an identity to cover my tracks. The most reasonable identity I can think of right now is a scholar who has studied abroad, achieved success, and returned home in glory, returning to Lei Town with my butler to visit family. Because, in my impression, the people of Lei Town are very xenophobic. Old Jiang was very supportive of my plan. He immediately went out to purchase the things I requested. The next day, we were on a train heading to Hubei. Of course, we couldn't forget the golden-spotted tortoiseshell cat. Once on the train, I made sure to fully embrace the airs of an overseas young master. Not only did I order old Jiang to serve me tea and water, but I also spoke a few words in English from time to time. This was all a deliberate performance to fit the role, but I unexpectedly attracted the attention of the beautiful stewardesses, who winked at me. They seemed to really take me for a rich young man who had studied abroad. After a day and night on the train, we finally arrived at a small station, on the border between Jingmen and Yichang. Just before I got off, a charming stewardess secretly slipped me a small note. Then she ran away blushing. The note had the train attendant's name on it, Lin Chuyue. So, it seems my plan was quite successful. It's a pity this station is still as desolate as when I left all those years ago. Such a small station, there aren't even any rickshaws. We had no choice but to walk. 2 hours later, I followed my memory to a wasteland. Old Jiang, who was following behind me, kept grumbling. He kept questioning whether I had taken the wrong path. How could I have taken the wrong path? I escaped along this path step by step all those years ago. I'd remember it even if it were turned to ashes. Just then, the cat in my arms suddenly struggled free and jumped out. Then it darted off. Lao Jiang and I could only chase after it. After running 200 meters, we suddenly discovered a crescent-shaped fishing village ahead. Many fishermen were processing fresh catches. And Dahu, who had just escaped, was squatting on the ground staring at a food stall. Good grief. The cat's sense of smell is really sharp. Old Jiang and I can't run anymore. Let's just sit at the stall and order something to eat. In the blink of an eye, 3 bowls of fragrant fish soup were served. I took a sip of the fish soup. Then I looked at the big river not far away and asked the food stall owner, is that river the Zhang River? This young master even knows about Zhang River. The snack stall owner seemed surprised. Old Jiang quickly chimed in. Our young master is a native of the other side of Zhang River. He just returned from studying abroad to visit family. Hearing this, the snack stall owner's expression completely changed. The other side of Zhang River? Could you be from Lei Town? This is the first time I've ever seen someone from Lasian wandering around outside, and they even went abroad to study. The owner's surprise is completely understandable. After all, the people of Lasian never leave. For generations, they've lived on that isolated island across the Zhang River. Even when they run out of daily necessities, they just send someone to the nearby fishing village to buy supplies. They never take a step further. Suddenly, the snack stall owner muttered as if he remembered something. That's strange. Usually, the Lei clan sends someone to buy salt from me at the beginning of every month. But it's already the middle of the month, and I haven't seen them. Could it be that their taste has changed, and they don't eat salt anymore? Hearing this, Lao Jiang and I exchanged a knowing glance, because we both simultaneously realized a key piece of information. Lei Town. Something happened. So, Lao Jiang quickly took out a silver dollar and placed it on the table. Then he asked the boss, has anything strange happened around here recently? All for this silver dollar. The snack stall owner racked his brain, trying to remember. Suddenly, he smacked his head and said, right, the Dragon King inspected the river 2 days ago. The Dragon King inspected the river. Seeing our interest, the snack stall owner immediately launched into a lengthy explanation. Apparently, 2 nights ago, many ghastly white will-o'-the-wisps suddenly appeared on the other side of the Zhang River. A woman who was fishing late one night drifted too close to the lights. Her boat capsized, and she was lost. The next day, her body was found floating in the river. The villagers were terrified and no longer dared to go out at night. They said it was the Dragon King on patrol. The will-o'-the-wisps were lanterns carried by his shrimp soldiers and crab generals. Anyone who saw them would be taken to the Dragon King's palace in the East Sea. After hearing what the snack stall owner said, I immediately furrowed my brows. The monthly salt purchase deal had been cancelled, and on top of that, there was the mysterious ghostly fire across the river. Both pieces of information hinted that something had happened in Lay Town. However, at that time, I never imagined that the real change would be even more terrifying than I thought. After settling the bill, I asked the owner if he could help us find a ferry to take us across to the other side. The snack stall owner showed a troubled expression and said, "Young master, you're from Lay Town, you should know the rules over there. Lay Town doesn't welcome outsiders. If they find out we're the ones ferrying you, they probably won't do business with us." I completely understood the owner's concern, so I chose a compromise. "Can you help us rent a small boat? Even a wooden one is fine. We'll row ourselves." The snack stall owner said this wouldn't be a problem. He had a boat. So we rented the snack stall owner's boat, and slowly rowed towards Lasian on the other side of the river with our cat and luggage. But as luck would have it, dark clouds gathered overhead halfway through my journey. The outline of Thunder Town was already visible, on the island ahead, appearing and disappearing. However, the town was ancient and dilapidated, and around it stood 4 giant monster statues. Like 4 giants guarding Thunder Town. Just then, a bolt of lightning struck down. The pitter-patter of small raindrops hit my face. I knew a storm was coming. But I don't know why. After seeing those 4 stone statues, old Zhang's face turned grim. He also stopped talking to me, just kept his head down and rowed. Half an hour later, a tall, towering gate-shaped archway appeared before us. 8 large characters were clearly written on it. Li Family Thunder Town. Outsiders keep out. Under my direction, old Zhang rowed the boat into a moss-covered pond. After he secured the boat, we went ashore. As soon as I got off the boat, I started shouting, trying to lure the people of Lasian out, but it was dead silent all around. Old Zhang looked around, and after making sure no one was there, he said with a serious expression, "This hometown of yours is more than a little creepy. The archway we came through is carved in the shape of a coffin. In feng shui, that's called inviting yin. It's easy to carry the negative energy from the Zhanghe River into the town along with the water. This can form a haunted house. If I'm not mistaken, those 4 stone carvings are also significant. They continuously compress the negative energy that's been brought in. Eventually, it shoots straight up into the sky. It's storing negative energy and nurturing thunder. That's why this place has thunderstorms and rain every few days. This layout definitely wasn't designed by an ordinary person. I'm now 100% certain that this is where Wen Tao's descendants are hiding. This trip wasn't a waste of time. Old Zhang's face lit up as he spoke, carrying his bags, big and small, into the town. He even called out as he walked, "Folks, young Master Jinglan is back." That familiar, courteous manner of his, as if he were the one returning home in glory. Soon, rows of small bungalows appeared before my eyes. Lay Town was unusually quiet at this moment. Only strings of bells hanging under the eaves were stirred by the wind, creating a series of chimes. The bell sounds were clear and distant. It makes one think of the soul-settling bells in the electrified tombs. Suddenly, old Zhang stopped abruptly. His face panicked as he stared at the eaves of a house. He pointed at a distorted character carved on the bell and said, "Do you still recognize this? This is actually Zhenwen." Americans' observation skills are truly amazing. I've lived in Thunder Town for over a decade, and never noticed this detail. I only knew that hanging wind chimes is a Thunder Town custom. As long as there's a bell under the eaves, no matter how far, deceased relatives can hear the calls from home. I never thought there would be precious inscriptions carved on them. It seems there's actually someone in Lay Town who understands this. Old Zhang pulled out a notebook and started sketching the incomprehensible characters. Then, he pretended to ask me, "Young Master Jinglan, how much further is it to your home?" According to the rules, there should be patrols in Lay Town every day. Anyone with a new face would be driven out. But we've walked so far and haven't seen anyone. I saw a townsperson on patrol. Could it be that something really happened in Thunder Town? By now, it was completely dark. I pulled a flashlight from my pocket and switched it on. Following my memories, I led old Zhang to my childhood home. I don't know how long we walked, but I vaguely felt like someone was following us. And old Zhang noticed it too. He stopped and gave me a look. Then he put on an act and whispered, "Young Master Jinglan, why are you living in a place like this? Could it be haunted?" At that moment, I spun around, and shone my flashlight towards the corner of the street. I roared at the same time, "Who's there?" The other party didn't have time to hide. An old woman, hunched over, appeared in the beam of my flashlight. The old woman was carrying a lantern. One of her eyes was missing. The other stared at me sinisterly. Suddenly, the old woman let out 2 dry chuckles and said, "Don't be afraid. I'm not a ghost, old woman." As soon as I said that, the tightly closed doors of every house opened. Stiff figures, each holding a white lantern, stood in the doorways, staring straight at us. The scene was truly bizarre. Lao Jiang discreetly tugged on my sleeve. She reminded me to hurry up and greet my uncles. But what he didn't know was, at that moment, I was completely stunned, because none of the people here were familiar to me. Even though it had been over 10 years, everyone had changed so much. It shouldn't be that there wasn't a single familiar face. I started to wonder if I was seeing ghosts. The old woman smiled again and said cheerfully, "Are you two lost?" Hearing that, I'm even more certain something's wrong with these people. No one in Lasian is this polite. Anyone who dares to trespass here either gets tied up, or thrown into the river. Thinking of this, I had a sudden idea. I quickly grabbed the old woman's hand and said affectionately, "Granny Zhang, I'm Li Jinglan. I can't believe I've been abroad for almost 10 years. You've gotten so old. You're so old now, I barely recognize you. Jinglan." The old woman stammered in reply. Then I enthusiastically greeted the other villagers, and pretended to catch up with them, talking about family matters. But the townspeople were still wary of old Jiang and me. I quickly pointed to a house on the left and said, "That's where I used to live." After saying that, I hurried into the house that used to belong to my neighbor, Little Fatty. Sure enough, Little Fatty was gone too. A strange man was now living in his house. The man was about my age. "But you're tall and thin, not fat at all." But I still held your hand and started talking about the bad things we used to do together. Like how you cooked and ate Uncle Fu's old hen. I helped you cover it up, don't you remember? I even took you to secretly watch Ahua take a bath. Do you remember now? After staring blankly for a moment, the man suddenly pointed at my face and shouted, "Jing Lan, it really is you." Just then, the one-eyed old woman interrupted my performance. "It's so late. Jing Lan, you must be tired from the train ride. Let's catch up more tomorrow." I was thinking the same thing, but after looking at my old house, I said with a troubled look, "It's a shame no one's cleaned it since I left. Looks like I'll have to stay in the town's public housing." Hearing this, the one-eyed woman insisted on personally escorting us there. The government housing is located in the center of Thunder Town. That's also where the Ancestral Hall is. The Ancestral Hall is forbidden ground in Thunder Town. Of course, we can't go near it, so we have to live in a small wooden house. A little over 100 meters from the Ancestral Hall. That's what they call the government housing. If any outsiders come to town, they're housed there. But this kind of situation doesn't happen more than once or twice a year. After sending us into the room, the old woman didn't forget to remind us. "Remember, guests, don't go outside after midnight." I exchanged a glance with old Jiang. Then, I deliberately put on a very innocent expression and asked why. The old woman gave me a strange look. "The Dragon King has been patrolling the Zhang River these past few days, looking for a son-in-law. Young Master Jinglan is so handsome, and he's Western educated. If he were chosen, he'd die young." Old Jiang immediately replied, "Then this old geezer, should be fine, right?" His wife gave him a cold stare. "That's hard to say. Maybe the Dragon Palace needs a foreign housekeeper." We pretended to be scared, and quickly bolted the door, and closed the windows. Once the old woman's shadow was gone, I dared to share information with the American. "Shijiao, something's wrong with Lasian. I don't recognize a single person here. I just tested a few people, and they all seem off, especially the chubby kid next door. He's definitely not the chubby kid I know, because Chubby and I never peeked at Ahua bathing together. Ahua is actually a sow, and that old lady. People in Lasian are supposed to be forced to live in the Ancestral Hall at 40, so why is she wandering around town?" Old Jiang pondered for a moment and said, "In that case, let's keep playing along. We'll wait and see. Let's see what they're up to." Since all the residents of Thunder Town have been replaced, old Jiang and I are actually less tense now. By the light of the kerosene lamp, he took out his notebook again, and examined the inscription he'd copied. The character looks like a little person, with their arms crossed, as if defending against something, but I don't know why it would be carved on a wind chime. Old Jiang told me that while he's not an expert in ancient writing, he did spend some time studying Oracle Bone script. He said this character should represent the meaning of protection or guarding. He suspects that after Wen Tao's descendants fled for hundreds of years, their final choice to settle in Lasian is no coincidence. There must be something in Lasian that can protect them. "So, are we going out tonight?" I asked. Old Jiang's beaming face was illuminated by the light. "Since we're already here, why not go? And it has to be after midnight. Seems he's as rebellious as I am. The more you're told not to do something, the more you want to do it." There were still several hours until midnight. We took a nap first. After the appointed time, I fumbled in the dark and put on my shoes. I scooped up Dahue, who was sound asleep. In Lao Zhang's and my plan, Dahue was also a crucial part. An old man, a young man, and a cat began their operation under the cover of night. Lao Jiang deliberately let the cat out first. Then we pretended to chase after the cat. At the same time, we carefully observed our surroundings. Yet we discovered that there wasn't a single person watching nearby. Could it be that those strange townspeople actually took me for a foreign student visiting relatives, but we still didn't let our guard down. Our footsteps were light and slow, for fear of disturbing the wind chimes on either side of the street, because I once witnessed my own parents being locked in the ancestral hall. It has always been a knot in my heart. With selfish intentions, I deliberately led old Jiang towards the ancestral hall. Logically speaking, the ancestral hall is a place blessed by our ancestors, so it should be filled with righteous energy. But the first impression this place gives, it's eerie, gloomy, and oppressive. Old Jiang said immediately after seeing the ancestral hall. I was wondering before, why the archway at the entrance to your lay town was shaped like the head of a coffin. Now I understand. This ancestral hall is the body of the coffin. I followed old Jiang's words and looked at it again. As expected, this ancestral hall is perfectly square. Isn't it just a giant coffin? The main gate is even designed like a rolling stone door from an ancient tomb. On either side of the door are carved stone statues of two squatting monsters. One is a fierce-looking monkey, and the other a bird with 4 wings. These are Waziki and Shangliu. I cried out in surprise. These two monsters have appeared on my tattoo, and on the box Wen Tao left behind. Now they've appeared in the ancestral hall. And at this moment, Lao Jiang's gaze was drawn to the giant bronze pillar in the center of the hall. Lao Jiang insisted this thing isn't ordinary. Kid, do you know the origin of this thing? I thought back and said, when I was little, my parents seemed to have told me that this copper pillar is the oldest object in Lasian. Legend says it was built by our first ancestors. It took a lot of manpower and resources at the time, but its exact purpose has always been a mystery. The mayor just says it's for blessings and warding off evil. Old Jiang nodded. Then he suggested we climb over the wall and take a closer look at the pillar. But just as we climbed over, old Jiang pushed my head down and yelled, "Get down." Immediately after, a strange song came from inside the ancestral hall. The singing was incredibly sharp and terrifying, like some ancient curse. There was a faint light inside the hall, and we could see several figures moving back and forth. I don't know what they're doing. With a creak, the door opened. The one-eyed old woman came out first, and behind her, surprisingly, followed 4 blind old women. Except for the different placements of their blind eyes, they looked almost identical. They each carried a white paper lantern. They gradually walked towards the riverbank. I asked old Jiang with my eyes, should we follow or not? Old Jiang nodded in response, following behind us. The old women kept walking until they reached the giant stone sculpture by the river. We hid in the trees, too scared to get any closer, but I found that the group of unfamiliar townspeople had also gathered there, and the lanterns they were carrying were lit by themselves. But the lanterns burned with green fire. Lanterns with green flames floated in the darkness, looking just like the Dragon King patrolling the river. The blind old woman ignored them, and ordered someone to dig a hole below the stone carving with a hoe. Then they buried a large bag of something mysterious inside. Old Jiang and I were quite far away. I couldn't see clearly what it was. I only saw a dense cluster of lanterns circling the stone statue. They were singing an ancient ballad. It gave me goosebumps. I don't know how long they sang before they stopped. Then they picked up their hoes and shovels and started digging all over the island. He seems to be looking for something. This is strange to me. Even if he's looking for something, he shouldn't be searching villagers' homes, right? What could be buried by the river in the wilderness? There's nothing here but graves. As far as I remember, everyone born in Lasian is brought to the Zhang River. Then they choose a monster stone carving as their zodiac animal. Which carving they choose determines where they'll be buried after they die. But newborns don't have much awareness, so whichever direction they point their finger is considered their burial place. When I was little, I told my parents it was unlucky. Who thinks about dying right after being born? But my parents said it was a tradition passed down for generations in Lasian. I lived as a man of Lasian. Even in death, I'll be Lasian's eyes, guarding this place. That group of people had been digging for who knows how long, until the rooster crowed in the distance. The blind old woman finally called out, "The mountain tiger is coming. It's time to go back." My first thought after hearing that was, after the Cho hour comes the Yin hour, and the Yin hour often corresponds to the tiger in the Chinese zodiac. But what she meant by mountain tiger, I'm not sure. Anyway, regardless, the blind old woman and that group did leave. We only dared to go over there after making sure they had left. So the Dragon King's river tour the fishing village saw was all these guys pretending to be ghosts and gods, because I was really curious about what they buried in that package. I first bowed 3 times in front of the stone statue, and explained the situation before I dared to dig. After all, I'm from Lasian, and I wouldn't dare disrespect the statue that has protected Lasian for hundreds of years. At the very top of the stone carving was a giant human head. Below it was a body with sharp fangs and teeth. It's one of the tattoos on my back. I picked up a discarded iron spade from the ground, and tossed it to old Jiang, telling him to start digging. Old Jiang immediately became unhappy. "Why should I dig?" I said with a stern face. "That's what you get for being the Black Blade Qilin." With one shovel down, the stench of blood immediately filled the air. Old Jiang's expression turned grave. He signaled me to back up 10 paces. Then he dug faster and faster. The smell of blood in the air grew stronger and stronger. In the end, he actually dug up a bloody piece of human flesh. That piece of flesh is still fresh. It was clearly just cut from a living person. There's a tattoo of a gold-sprinkled nether beast on the skin. My mind was instantly in turmoil. It's obvious. This flesh was cut from some young person in Thunder Town. What in the world happened in Thunder Town? The person in front of me not only endured the cruel punishment of being torn apart by 5 horses, but was also buried under a stone carving of a feast. This is a blatant provocation to the entire Lei town. I told Lao Jiang to quickly bury the dirt back. Then I staggered back. But suddenly, I tripped over something underfoot. I looked down. It was actually a human shin bone. What a sin. What a sin. Dismembering a living person. And they even dug up the graves near the stone carvings. So brutal. I muttered, "Forgive me if I offend," and stuffed that severed leg bone back into the grave mound. But as I was doing so, I accidentally pulled out a human skull. I wanted to die. I buried it in a panic, but noticed something strange about the skull. There was an extra hole in its forehead, about the same size as an eye. I was scared, so I didn't think much of it at the time. But I never imagined that this skull held a huge secret. Seeing me still dawdling, Lao Jiang's strong hand yanked me up. "Something's approaching. Run." After Lao Jiang's warning, I noticed a whirring sound in the darkness. A massive swarm of red flying insects was descending toward the gluttonous stone carving. From a distance, it looked like a red sandstorm. Fortunately, the group of red flying insects did not chase us. They just kept circling around the stone carvings. We ran into Lei Town. After we could no longer see the red flying insects, we slowed down. We made our way back to the public house quietly, but on my way back, I noticed that the blind woman and her group seemed to be afraid of these flying insects as well. Every household along the way had their doors and windows tightly shut. Old Jiang asked me what these insects were. I said I didn't know. It was the first time I'd seen them too, because we're never allowed to go near those 4 stone carvings in Leishan, other than choosing my own burial plot at birth. Only after death will I be buried there by a dedicated funeral team. Suddenly, I remembered a key piece of information. My eyebrows shot up as I said, "Right. I remember when I was little, to stop me from sneaking over there. My parents repeatedly scared me by saying there were tigers in the mountains. They said the tigers would eat children, leaving nothing but bone fragments. Thinking about it now, I think there really is something like that. Having grown up in Leishan, I had absolutely no idea how many secrets the town actually holds. Old Jiang told me that according to his observations, this group of imposters in Leishan is far from simple. They're ruthless and organized. Definitely not ordinary martial artists. So for now, we can only continue to use fake identities to deal with them. After that, we each climbed into bed and caught up on sleep. Unexpectedly, that night, besides old Jiang and me, Big Tiger also had a surprise. The next day, while grooming Big Tiger, I noticed something shiny caught on its claw. I pulled it off and saw it was a sparkling earring. It wasn't the kind of earring a girl would wear, like a flower or a star. It was a sinister-looking scorpion. The scorpion's tail was curved upwards, and its back shimmered with a strange, deep blue. Old Jiang took it and examined it carefully. A flicker of suspicion crossed his eyes as he said, "This is not an antique. It's made with modern techniques. However, it is made of pure silver. Ordinary people definitely couldn't afford this. It's a pity Dahua can't talk. He can't tell us where this earring came from." At this moment, the blind old woman knocked on our door. She smiled and said from outside, "Young Master Jinglan, breakfast is ready. Everyone is waiting for you." I quickly hid the earring in my pocket, and then went over there with Lao Jiang and Dahu. At the table, besides the blind old woman, and the guy I called Chubby yesterday, and his parents. Chubby's parents are really smooth talkers. "Chubby, look at Jinglan, she's studying abroad. Then look at you." I put on a modest expression, and tossed out a few English words. I completely bluffed them. Xiaopang quickly got up and asked me to teach him some English. Just then, I noticed Xiaopang had a pierced ear on his right side. I gave Lao Jiang a look. Then, while eating my porridge, I secretly observed the others, and discovered everyone present had pierced ears. But the people of Leishan never pierced their ears. Could it be that the scorpion earring Dahua brought back came from them? Old Jiang casually asked, "Has anything been happening in town lately?" "Last night, I thought I heard someone singing." There was also a lot of commotion that woke me up several times. The group exchanged glances. He was clearly nervous, but he lied and said he didn't hear anything. He asked us if we had misheard. The blind old woman laughed and said, "Didn't I tell you? After 10 o'clock, the Dragon King patrols the river. No one in town will be wandering around." Then Fatty asked me again if I remembered what happened before. I said with a smirk, "Of course I remember. When you were getting that huge tattoo on your back as a kid, you cried like a baby." Hearing this, little Fatty's eyes lit up. He asked me if I remembered what the mayor said when we were getting our tattoos. I pretended to be thinking. Did I mention that? I don't remember. Little Fatty continued to probe, asking, then do you remember that in our town of Lei, there's a treasure passed down through generations? That treasure can. Before Little Fatty could finish, the blind old woman suddenly coughed. Then he turned to me and said, young Master Jinglan, you have quite a bit of mud on your soles. I'll have Appa wash them for you and Steward Jiang. Old Jiang and I looked down at our feet at the same time, only then realizing they were still covered in the black mud we picked up last night near the stone sculptures. Oh no. Fortunately, old Jiang's mind works quickly. He immediately apologized to me. Young master, it's all my fault for forgetting to give you a clean pair of shoes. When we landed yesterday, we stepped into the mud. The smell was awful. I smiled and reassured him it was fine. Anyway, there were still dress shoes in the suitcase. Just change into it later. The blind old woman looked at me skeptically. Then she looked at old Jiang. In the end, she didn't say anything more. However, little Pang never brought up Thunder Town again after being interrupted. After breakfast, I told old Jiang that I wanted to walk around Thunder Town, and also offer incense to the ancestors at the ancestral hall. The blind granny nodded in agreement, but she wanted to come with us to the ancestral hall, because of what old Jiang said earlier. This time when I came to the ancestral hall, I felt like I was in a coffin. Every step I took, it felt like someone was breathing down my neck. The blind granny inserted the key into the broken dragon stone door, and slowly pushed it open. What came into view was the courtyard of the ancestral hall, and that strange bronze pillar. Looking at it now, the bronze pillar was much clearer than at night. Its surface shimmered with a metallic sheen, and was carved with intricate patterns. They seemed to depict small figures climbing a ladder towards the sky. The ladder in the image stretched as far as the eye could see. I don't know if it has any special meaning. As the blind old woman pushed open the inner door, we saw a plaque inscribed with "Blessing Descendants" come into view. On the altar table below the plaque, 4 or 5 layers of ancestral tablets were arranged. However, the top layer was particularly empty. Logically, shouldn't that spot be reserved for the tablet of the oldest ancestor? But what was placed there didn't seem to be an ancestral tablet. It was a square wooden frame, covered with a piece of black cloth. It looked especially eerie. The blind old woman asked me, "Why isn't Butler Jiang coming in?" I smiled at her and said, "Did you forget? Only the men of the Li family can enter the ancestral hall. Steward Jiang is an outsider. How could he be qualified?" As soon as I said that, the blind old woman couldn't very well enter. She just stood at the door and laughed awkwardly. Look at my memory. I actually forgot this custom. Then I went to the ancestral tablets alone and knelt down. I kowtowed respectfully 3 times. Actually, I don't have much affection for Leisian. I actually resent it. My parents were dragged into this ancestral hall, and were never seen again. So after offering incense, I planned to leave. But just then, Dahu seemed to have been triggered by something. It inexplicably jumped onto the ancestral altar. I looked at the rows of memorial tablets, and broke into a cold sweat. What if Dahua knocked over the ancestral tablets? You know, the ancestral tablets on the altar aren't placed randomly. The higher the generation, the higher the position. But Dahua kept jumping higher and higher, until it finally stopped at the top row. What's worse is, it was actually eyeing the object covered by the black cloth, itching to jump at it. I quickly rushed forward to stop it, fearing that this fat cat might get me killed. But the fat cat was too fast. When it jumped, it actually lifted a corner of the black cloth, though the cloth quickly fell back down. But I felt like I'd fallen into an icy abyss. I couldn't say a word. I can't describe the fear I felt at that moment, because I saw it clearly, the thing hidden under the black cloth. When I left the ancestral hall, my clothes were soaked through. The moment old Jiang saw me, he knew something was wrong, and wanted to ask me what had happened. I just dragged him back. After we got back to the house, Lao Jiang quickly shut all the doors and windows. He made sure no one was following us before he spoke. What just happened? I was still terrified. Can you believe it? My ancestor, Wen Tao, was actually a monster. Then I recounted exactly what had just happened in the ancestral hall. I told them everything. Because of Dahu's mischief, I saw what was covered by the black cloth. It was actually a portrait of our ancestor. In the portrait, our ancestor was wearing bright red military attire. However, he had a third eye on his forehead. To emphasize the importance of that eye, the artist painted the third eye especially ghost-like. I even felt like the eye winked at me. Remember last night, next to the stone carving on the riverbank, I unexpectedly found that skull. It also had a hole in its forehead the size of an eye socket. I suspect there's a huge secret hidden in Leisian. This secret might explain, why do the villagers of Leisian have to live in the ancestral hall after 40, even if they are the Black Blade Qilin? Even old Jiang had never heard of such a thing. He stubbed out his cigarette, and said resolutely, "No, we must go back into the ancestral hall. After it gets dark, old Jiang and I will sneak out." Because old Jiang complained about the noise in the ancestral hall during the day. Tonight it's unusually quiet, but this time we didn't bring Da Tiger with us, for fear he might do something outrageous again. In the pale candlelight, I saw Rows of ancestral tablets neatly arranged. Only the highest point was empty. The portrait I saw during the day was still covered with a black cloth. Old Jiang clasped his hands before the memorial tablet and said, "Please forgive my offense. I beg your pardon." Then he stepped onto the table and used his superior lightness skill to rip off the black cloth. A majestic portrait of an ancient man suddenly appeared before us. He was wearing a bright red Ming-style armor. It was none other than the tomb-raiding king, Wen Tao, and on his forehead there was clearly a third eye. The eye was straight as a line, firmly embedded between his brows. It made me think of Erlang Shen from the comic books. Old Jiang took just one glance and quickly covered it with the black cloth. A look of deep fear appeared on his face. He paused for a moment before speaking. I never thought Wen Tao really was a monster in disguise, but none of the historical documents Qilin collected said anything about him having a third eye. I reminded old Jiang that it probably all started at Yin Su. Don't forget, Wen Tao was the first one to come out of Yin Su alive. It must have been from then on that his body started to change. He was rumored to be a monster. The emperor must have seen his third eye too. Out of fear, he wanted to exterminate him. I think this must be the curse from Yin Su. Lao Jiang looked at me strangely, but didn't argue. Perhaps in his mind, this guess was closest to the truth. However, just as we were about to leave, Lao Jiang waved his hand. Wait. Then old Jiang looked at the wall to the west. On the wall, there was a painting of the three-star gods of fortune, prosperity, and longevity. This is a common image in folk ancestral halls. It symbolizes blessings and longevity for future generations. Old Jiang pressed his entire ear against the wall. His hands were feeling around the peach of immortality in the longevity star's arms. Sometimes he even tapped it with his fingers. It was as if there was something behind the wall. Could he, a master of mechanisms, have discovered something? Seeing old Jiang's serious expression, I didn't want to disturb him. But just then, a burst of footsteps suddenly came from the ancestral hall courtyard. Judging by the sound, there were at least 2 people. Seeing them getting closer and closer, I wanted to pull old Jiang away. He frowned and gritted his teeth as he said, "Don't panic. I have a solution." As soon as he finished speaking, old Jiang raised his hand and slapped it. He actually slapped the peach in the birthday person's arms inside. There was a soft click. A small secret door appeared on the wall, flipped open. Old Jiang pulled me inside quickly. The wall then returned to its original state. I let out a long sigh of relief. I quietly asked old Jiang how he discovered this hidden door. Old Jiang chuckled. Grave robbers always believe in having multiple escape routes, especially when Wen Tao's descendants were being hunted down back then. No matter where they settled, he definitely left a way out. Ever since I came in, I sensed something was off with the murals. Who paints the god of longevity holding a peach to his chest? Plus, this spot happens to be the Blythe Gate in the Bagua. It clearly symbolizes escape. I tested it out and, sure enough, found a hidden door. I was just about to express my admiration, but old Jiang quickly covered my mouth. I only heard the 2 people from just now enter the ancestral hall. They seemed to be saying something. From the sound of their voices, it was the 2 blind old women. One of the old women sighed and asked, "I really don't know how much longer we have to stay in this ghostly place. Third sister, when can we go back?" Another one sneered, "Didn't they tell us before we came, that if we don't find that thing in a day, we can't go back?" One of the blind old women cursed. "These bastards won't say a word. We've already killed several, but they're still so stubborn, especially the mayor. His youngest son and daughter were chopped into 5 pieces by us, but he didn't even flinch." Hearing this, my heart skipped a beat. Although I also hate Lei Town, this method is too cruel. What are these people's identities? I never would have guessed. Old Jiang and I are also involved in their next conversation. I think that little Huanzi, the one who came back from overseas, seems to know something. Tomorrow at dinner I'll try to get him drunk, and pry something out of him. If that doesn't work, we'll just tie him up and torture him. He looks delicate, so he probably won't last long before he talks. But we have to get rid of that old geezer first. Once the old bastard is dead, the young one will be at our mercy. Old Jiang gritted his teeth and angrily grabbed the sheath of his black blade. I could only force a laugh, and warn old Jiang not to be impulsive. The 2 blind old women's voices grew fainter and fainter, eventually turning into whispers. I couldn't hear anything anymore. I decided to take a look around the secret room. There was only a moldy wooden bed inside. On the bed was a stack of books. I casually flipped through a couple of pages. To my surprise, I discovered it was the Lei Town family genealogy. And according to the genealogy, the first ancestor really was Wen Tao. Ancestor Wen Tao, commanding 100,000 tomb raiders. He rescued the country from dire straits, bestowed the imperial surname Li and rode in the emperor's carriage. He was in theft as a king. From then on, Wen Tao's descendants all adopted the surname Li. Looking at the rows of names surnamed Li, old Jiang said, "Something's not right. Since Wen Tao was killed by the emperor, why did his descendants continue to use the surname Li?" I speculated, perhaps on the one hand, to conceal their identity, and avoid attracting attention. and on the other hand, to ensure that future generations would always remember the name, and the irreconcilable blood feud. I also saw my name in the family tree. Lee's dead. Besides the family tree, there's nothing of value here. Let's go back to the stone wall and listen. Those two old women are about to leave too. Before leaving, they said, tomorrow we'll proceed as planned. Kill the old man first, then grab the young one. Hearing the words, old brats, old John's face darkened again. I knew. Those blind old women would probably be in trouble soon. After the two blind old women left, we carefully returned to the public house. The next morning, the blind old woman knocked on the door at the usual time. Let's have some congee to line our stomachs first. We'll be treated properly at noon. We smiled and agreed. But we knew deep down this was a banquet at Hongmen. These people no longer wanted to pretend. Today was the moment when everything would be revealed. Before the banquet at Hongmen, old Jiang specially took out a pill for me to swallow. It's supposed to be an antidote, just in case they try anything funny. The food and drinks were set up right on the cobblestone street. It was a real outdoor feast. The blind granny poured us some wine. She said it was her best vintage, something she'd been saving. She filled Lao Zhang's and my bowls to the brim. Little Fatty kept urging us to drink. We've been brothers for so many years, but haven't seen each other. We should drink more. I lifted a bowl and finished it in one go. Then I purposely asked Xiao Pang, do you remember? When we were kids, we stole that strange copper box from the mayor's house. We got beaten half to death by our parents. It's just a pity I don't know what's hidden inside the box. Fatty's expression suddenly became extremely agitated. He grabbed my hand and pressed me. Do you remember where the mayor put the box? At first, I said I didn't remember, but then I noticed a murderous glint in the blind old woman's eyes. So I immediately changed my tune and said, just kidding. I still remember that place vividly. But didn't you steal the box with me back then? How could you? Ouch. Why does my head hurt so much? As I was saying this, my head slumped onto the table. Old Jiang followed suit, pretending to be drunk and passing out. Fatty kept shaking me and yelling, young Master Jinggang. Li Jinglan. Seeing I didn't react, he stood up and sighed. Who gave him so much of the drug? I almost got it out of him. He said the thing is at the mayor's house. But we've searched that room 3 times already. Is there some kind of hidden room or secret passage? The blind old woman gave a cold laugh. Since that little brat saw the box when Tao left behind, it means our trip wasn't in vain. I don't believe that box could just fly away. I thought to myself, I didn't expect such a small test. This confirmed they were really after my ancestor's secret. But that painting wasn't in Leishan to begin with. It was in Shoshui village. Then Fatty and the others tied old Jiang and me up with rope. Old Jiang and I pretended to be unconscious the whole time, until we were carried to a foul-smelling place. I suddenly remembered. There's a large shed in Leishan specifically for raising cattle and sheep. The blind old woman complained that it smelled here. She handed me and old Jiang over to Xiao Pang and left. Xiao Pang threw us into a makeshift cell. Then he picked up a basin of cold water and splashed it on us to wake us up. We cooperated by pretending to wake up. It turned out the entire greenhouse had been transformed into a prison. There were chaotic shouting sounds from the next cell. It must be the other residents of Lei Town being held there. I rubbed my eyes and asked where I was. Xiao Pang sneered repeatedly. You've fallen into the tiger's den. How can you still be so naive? Did learning English make you stupid? I still wanted to pretend I didn't understand. But Lao Jiang quickly got into character. He said pathetically, young master, you've mistaken the bad guys for your own brothers. I told you something was off about this town. Old man, shut up. The fake Fatty immediately kicked old Jiang and grabbed my collar, demanding to know the whereabouts of that bronze coffin. I said I didn't know. Fake Fatty immediately signaled to his 2 accomplices behind him. One of them paced back and forth with a leather whip. The other sat there whittling bamboo skewers with a small knife. Fake Fatty didn't forget to explain. Later, they'll whip old Jiang until his skin is flayed and his flesh is torn open. Then, they'll use these thin bamboo skewers, one by one, and drive them into old Jiang's fingernails. Let him experience what it means to feel pain through interconnected fingers. My scalp tingled with fear. But just as they were about to lay hands on him, a blade suddenly slid out of old Jiang's sleeve. He pinched the blade between 2 fingers, and cleanly sliced through the rope. Not good. The guy with the whip sensed trouble, and lashed out with it. Old Jiang, with a smile, drew a black blade from his boot. A flash of white light streaked through the dim surroundings. The guy clutched his throat and collapsed. It all happened in the blink of an eye. By the time the fake Fatty tried to escape, his other accomplice had also had his throat slit. Old Jiang picked him up and tossed him in front of me. Then, with a flash of his blade, he cut the ropes binding me. Fake Fatty collapsed on the ground, trembling all over. He was about to ask old Jiang who he really was, but his eyes fell on the black blade that old Jiang had just sheathed. Your black blade Qilin. By this point, he had been completely overwhelmed by old Jiang's powerful aura. He immediately knelt down and begged for mercy. It was all those guys outside. I'm just a small fry. Old Jiang smiled as he toyed with the black blade in his hand. Speak. Who exactly are you? What is your purpose in coming to Lay Town? Where did you take the people of Lay Town? For every question you don't answer, I'll cut off your left ear. For every 2 questions you don't answer, I'll cut off your right ear. You won't answer any of the 3 questions, I'll take your life. Fake Fatty trembled all over from old Jong's threat. He stammered and said, "We're a group of tomb robbers. We heard there's a treasure hidden in Lay Town. Whoever possesses this treasure will." He helped us find a large tomb. And that's when I got greedy. As for the villagers of Lasian, they are being held next door. Grave robbers. Old Jiang gave a cold laugh, and opened his hand, revealing the scorpion earring that Dahu had found. I've been in the tomb raiding business for 30 years, but I've never heard of tomb raiders wearing such a woman's accessory. You think you can fool me? The fake fat guy's expression changed dramatically when he saw the earring. Suddenly, he grabbed a handful of lime powder and threw it into the air. Luckily, Lao Jiang and I were prepared. We quickly covered our eyes with our sleeves. The fake fat guy shouted loudly. He lunged at me with a dagger. Because the lime powder was still in the air, the whole room was filled with a white fog. I couldn't see where the dagger was aimed at. I just knew he was coming at me with it. So I yelled, "Lao Jiang, help me." Immediately after, I heard Lao Jiang's voice echo in the room. "He is now aiming for your abdomen. Turn to the side. He will have a second of hesitation. Take advantage of that second. Strike his elbow. His dagger will drop. Then pick up the dagger and stab him." I didn't have time to think. I just reacted instinctively, and with just one move, I knocked the fake fatty's dagger away. Then I quickly grabbed the dagger. But now, in my hand, this dagger felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Although I was the only one who survived the 1,000-hand Rakshasa tomb, killing someone was still a first for me. Old Zhang's voice rang out again. "Finish him. Showing mercy to your enemy is being cruel to yourself. Jinglan, this is the first lesson I'm teaching you. See? He's reaching for a hidden weapon." I looked down. Sure enough, fake fatty, at some point, pulled out 3 blue darts. They were clearly poisoned. This time, I didn't hesitate. I closed my eyes, and stabbed out with the dagger in my hand. Along with a scream, a warm liquid splashed onto my face. I stabbed him 4 or 5 more times. I didn't stop until the fake fatty collapsed to the ground. When I saw this, old Jiang smiled and lit a cigarette. Everyone has their first time. Compared to me back then, you've done pretty well. I didn't respond to old Jiang. I snatched his cigarette and took a harsh drag, finally catching my breath. When old Jiang and I walked out of that cell, and saw the empty fields around us, I couldn't help but sigh. No wonder we made such a racket and no one came. Turns out there were only 3 guards here. But where did those fake villagers go? Old Jiang told me not to worry about that for now. He said we should focus on rescuing the people from Lasian first. We followed the sound to the next building. We discovered the entire greenhouse had been converted into small prison cells. Each cell held 4 or 5 people. Those people were disheveled, their clothes stained with blood. He kept shaking the bars of the cage. He started cursing at old Jiang and me when he saw us walk by. "Who are you people? How long are you going to keep us locked up?" I saw the 2 people in the second cell, and they looked vaguely familiar. They looked a lot like my childhood playmates. I quickly ran over and shouted, "Dan, Dog San Z, it's me." "You are." Both of them were somewhat suspicious. I quickly removed my gold-rimmed glasses and leaned in close to them. Dan and Dog San Z immediately got excited. "Jinglan, it really is you. It's been over 10 years since we last saw each other. But the bonds we forged as children are real. If it weren't for them covering for me, I wouldn't have been able to escape Lasian. Speaking of which, I should thank them." I glanced at the lock on the iron cage. Logically, the key should be on the guard. But I searched a few bodies twice and couldn't find it. Old Jiang was leaning against the wall, smiling. "Have you forgotten what I'm best at?" He took a silver needle from his pocket and poked the lock. In just a few seconds, the copper lock fell to the ground. Then old Jiang went to open the other cells. I grabbed 2 Egg and Dog 3 by the hands, and asked them who those fake townspeople on the island really were. Dog 3 said he didn't know, only that they came prepared. They secretly poisoned the only water source in Thunder Town, and after knocking everyone unconscious, they've kept us imprisoned here. They keep interrogating us about the secrets of Thunder Town. He even went so far as to kill the mayor's youngest son and daughter. At this point, everyone turned their gaze to a middle-aged man. The middle-aged man had a dignified appearance and determined eyes, but his entire body was severely scarred from whiplashes. I asked in surprise, "Is he the mayor?" "Wasn't our mayor back then called Li Shigua?" Go Sanzi told me that the old town mayor later went into the ancestral hall and his fate is unknown. Now his son is handling all the affairs in Lasian. I had mixed feelings, but old Jiang reminded me that now is not the time to dwell on this. The top priority is how to deal with those people. The new town mayor sneered, and thanked us outsiders for saving their lives. "But Razor Town is our home. We'll handle this ourselves." The townsfolk responded in unison, following a strange whistle from the new mayor. They swarmed the fields with remarkable coordination, digging wherever there was a scarecrow. They unearthed wooden crates, Upon opening them, the box was filled with many brand new bows, arrows, and long knives. Then, the new town mayor gave an order. Everyone, form up. Immediately, everyone strapped on their longbows. They spread out in groups of 3. Even Erden and Go Sanzai were no longer the mischievous children they once were. Instead, they had transformed into soldiers. Old Jiang laughed hoarsely. I underestimated you, he went on to explain. Besides the numerous secret doors in Lasian, there should be many hidden armories. What these townspeople have are Tang swords and longbows that only elite troops of the Tang dynasty possessed. And every single one of them is powerful and skilled in a very profound battle formation. I'm 100% sure they're descendants of the Ju Di army. If it weren't for the knockout gas, those guys outside might not have had the upper hand in a real fight. Just then, I suddenly heard Dahu barking. Dahu came running towards me hurriedly. Its fur stood on end, as if it had experienced something dangerous. Old Jiang stood on his tiptoes to look, and then shouted, No, there's thick smoke rising from the ancestral hall. It seems those villains are all near the ancestral hall. Upon hearing that something had happened at the ancestral hall, the new mayor's face immediately changed. He quickly ordered all the townspeople to go over. But what I absolutely didn't expect was that they didn't charge straight ahead. Instead, after crossing the fields, they each disappeared into houses, wells, or the woods. So there were tunnels dug all over Lasian. They were prepared long ago to prevent enemy invasion. But I was too young at the time. I wasn't qualified to know these secrets. Old Jiang and I followed Go Sanzi into the tunnel at his house. The tunnel led directly to the vicinity of the ancestral hall. Then we saw almost all the fake townspeople gathered there at the ancestral hall. They were all dressed in black, holding torches in their hands. Those blind old women kept chanting, You old undying things, burn them, smoke them out. I was stunned when I heard this. What did she mean by that? Could it be that those who entered the ancestral hall didn't die, but instead, they hid with their secret somewhere I don't know? Suddenly, a wolf-tooth arrow shot out, striking the back of a blind old woman. The arrow pierced through her body, forcing her to her knees. The blind old woman at the front immediately shouted, Ambush! Everyone, be on guard. However, once the people of Thunder Town set up their battle formation, they are practically unstoppable. They can appear anywhere. As long as an arrow is released, it's certain to take someone's life. Go Sanzi boasted to me smugly, Brother Jinglan, let me show you my little brother's trick, the rain of arrows. He knocks an arrow and draws his bow. He fires 2 wolf-tooth arrows, one after the other. One enemy barely blocked the first arrow with a dagger, but the second arrow coldly pierced his throat. The old man on the side nodded in approval. The younger generation is just as impressive. No wonder the Juezi army was able to steal so many grand tombs back in the day. Though the imposters posing as Lasian's men were individually quite skilled, they quickly crumbled against this military formation. Now only the 2 blind women remain. Seeing them trying to escape in the chaos, old Jiang patted my shoulder. He and I immediately jumped over the wall and chased after them. The blind woman who had been attending to us, mother-in-law, was surprised to see us. So it's you too. Old Jiang smiled and put his hand on his hip. The other person recognized him at a glance. Kirin. It's actually Black Blade Kirin. However, even with the 2 blind mother-in-laws attacking together, they couldn't defeat the Black Blade in old Jiang's hand. Every time the Black Blade was drawn, it forced them back a step, but I didn't know who they were. And old Jiang couldn't seem to take them down. At the critical moment, I raised the longbow I'd borrowed from Go Sanzi, and aimed it at the blind old woman, drawing the string. But she dodged too quickly. After the arrow was shot, the arrowhead only grazed her face. Unexpectedly, it pulled off a wrinkled human skin mask. Beneath the mask was revealed a stunning young woman, even though she wore ragged clothes, and a gray-haired old woman's wig. Even these couldn't hide her breathtaking beauty. Chapter 17, The Underground Incident. I never imagined the old, blind hag could have such a young and beautiful true form. I couldn't help but stare, dumbfounded. The young woman bit her lip in hatred, and drew a barbed whip from behind her waist, lashing it out at me. He roared, I'll kill you, you little bastard. He lunged at me recklessly. Old Jiang sensed something was terribly wrong. He tried to protect me, but was entangled by another blind old woman, and couldn't break free. I was about to draw my bow, but the whip was like it had eyes. I rolled up my longbow and threw it away. This is how I knew the difference in strength between the 2 sides. Without thinking, I ran towards the crowd, but I was lashed hard across my back. The whip tore my skin open. I almost cried. This woman is so beautiful, but her hand is so vicious. Just as I turned my head, the girl put her human skin mask back on, and sneered, anyone who sees my face must die. Her whip lashed out directly at my throat. At the critical moment, a Langia sword shot out, saving my life. I looked over in astonishment. It's the new mayor. The other Thunderclap residents also arrived with their bows drawn. Seeing the situation take a turn for the worse, the other blind woman threw a smoke bomb into the crowd. Go! We can't open our eyes in this thick smoke. When the smoke cleared, the blind woman and the beautiful young woman were gone. Lao Jiang, come back to me. He asked about my injuries. I glanced at the black knife on Lao Jiang's waist. The pain in my back intensified. I couldn't help but complain. I almost thought you'd have to take on another apprentice. Don't say that. You're definitely the last one. Lao Jiang laughed heartily, but when he checked my back, he gasped. A look of distress crossed his face. It's so bad, he said. Old Jiang took out a small bottle, and sprinkled the white powder inside evenly over my back. He said it was Yunnan Baiyao. It can stop the bleeding quickly, and speed up the healing process. Then, he simply bandaged my wound and told me that I absolutely couldn't let it get wet for the next few days. After those enemies were killed or had fled, Thunder Town returned to its peaceful state. But Mayor Xian didn't show any sign of joy. Instead, he anxiously arranged for the residents to fetch water. I originally thought the fire was because they were afraid of the ancestral hall burning down, but I never expected. After the fire was extinguished, Mayor Xian ordered everyone to return to their homes. Without his whistle, no one was allowed to leave. It reminded me of what the blind old woman said when the fire broke out in the noisy hall. She said this, "A bunch of old, worthless things. I know where you're hiding." The interrogation room is only so big. Could this ancestral hall hold another secret? As for the new county magistrate's orders, not a single resident resisted. They all silently obeyed. Go Sanzi and Erden enthusiastically invited me to their home. I was about to go back to recover from my injuries, but I was stopped by the new mayor. Quan Lan, you and that old gentleman stay behind. I wanted to ask what was going on. He lit a torch and walked into the village hall. My roommate followed him. He stood before the giant bronze cauldron in the courtyard of the village hall, holding a small hammer. I struck the giant frog 9 times. Suddenly, a huge echo spread from underground. It made the soles of our feet tingle. What are you doing? I asked curiously. Old Jiang was muttering to himself. Why is this echo coming from underground? Suddenly, he realized something. I understand. This giant bronze clam is connected to the underground, half of it. There must be a large space underground. Or perhaps that's the real thunderquake. Old Jiang's words were somewhat baffling. The new lock leader nodded and said, "You're right. A long, long time ago, in order to escape persecution, our ancestors could only move from place to place. But they eventually discovered that whether they lived in the mountains or in the forests, the enemy would always find them. So they came to the Zhang River, and came up with a bold idea, to first build a fortress underground, and then build an identical town above ground. So from the very beginning, there were two legions here," Xian Chang explained. Later, as time passed, and dynasties changed, there were no more enemies hunting us down. We all lived peacefully in the upper legion, while the lower legion, it's used to hide an unspeakable secret. After saying this, Xian Chang shot me a warning glance. Jin Lan, I know you hate legion. He and his family dragged your parents into the ancestral hall, and turned you into an, but please believe me, I will soon show you the truth. I just wanted to say. Suddenly, I felt the ground beneath my feet shake violently. It was as if, with the chapel as the center, a small earthquake had occurred. The leaves on both sides rustled downwards. Dust in the courtyard was kicked up. This lasted for almost a minute. Then, the courtyard, right down the middle, split open, forming a huge chasm. The ravine is perfectly flat. It's clearly not naturally formed. Seeing this, the new mayor held a torch, and leaned over the fissure, shouting, "Dad, are you all alright?" From the dark fissure, came a frail voice. "Luckily, you came just in time. Otherwise, we would have been trapped down here." It was the old village chief who answered. I'd never forget that voice, even in my dreams. He's the one who ordered my parents locked up in the ancestral hall. I shouted furiously towards the ravine. "You old bastard, where did you hide my parents?" By the light of the torch, I saw that although the ditch was dark and gloomy, there really was the outline of a lock. In the hollowed-out earth, rows of low bungalows had been built. At least 70 or 80 people lived there, and the lower half of the giant bronze clam stood right in the center of those bungalows. Dense chains extend down from the giant clam. From above, it looks like a giant spiderweb. I have no idea what it's used for. After my shouts reached the bottom, the people inside asked who I was. Mayor Xian quickly explained. He's that brat who escaped over a decade ago. Li Jinlan and I were kidnapped by a group of enemies. Thankfully, Jinlan showed up just in time and saved us. After saying that, she took Lao Jiang and me down. It turns out there was a rope ladder on the edge of the ditch. We quickly reached the 7th underground level. We also lit all the lamps used for illumination. Instantly, the place was brightly lit. This thunder array built underground was like a miracle. As soon as I landed, I was about to go settle the score with old Chang, but before I could find a suitable stick, an elderly woman suddenly rushed out. "Jinlan. Is that our Jinlan?" The moment I saw the woman, my mind went completely blank. although she was completely wrapped in black cloth, revealing only half of her face. But I recognized her immediately. This was my mother. "Mother," I asked stiffly, "my son." "My son." The woman rushed out, and held me tightly in her arms. Even after all these years, even though our appearances had changed somewhat, but as long as we say goodbye, we can still recognize each other. She is my mother. She is the mother I think of day and night. I looked at the old town mayor beside me. She was also wearing an ancient black robe. A piece of black cloth was wrapped around her forehead, which looked very strange. Looked at me with a kind expression and said, "It's so good that you returned home safe and sound. It's truly wonderful. What's going on here? Isn't the old town mayor a bad person? Where's my father?" I asked mother. Mother turned her head away, sighed, and said, "Your father, he's passed away." Then my mother told me, entering the Litang was their own choice, and they didn't blame the old village chief. On the contrary, they were grateful to him. Otherwise, they would have died at 40. I was increasingly confused. Lao Jiang, however, asked with a serious face, "Is it because of that curse removal?" The black-robed figures who heard the word curse-breaking were all greatly shocked. Old Jiang continued, "Ever since I came down here, I've noticed that all of you have a black cloth wrapped around your heads. Isn't it to cover your third eye? Don't worry, I won't think of you as monsters. I just want to know the truth. If I were a bad guy, I wouldn't have brought Jinlan home. I certainly wouldn't have helped you drive away those enemies. But you need to think clearly. If you continue to hide this secret, those people will come back again." The old mayor's expression was somewhat annoyed. He looked at his son, the new mayor, but shook his head repeatedly. "I didn't tell them about my father. They guessed it themselves." Seeing old Zhang's reaction, Lao Jiang and I both knew that our previous speculations about Lei Zhen were basically completely correct. To convince old Zhang, Lao Jiang immediately recounted the events of the past few days. One by one, in detail. "A mysterious force has set its sights on Lei Zhen. We saved Lei Zhen by accident." Regarding this point, the new mayor also spoke favorably. "It was indeed Jin Lan and this old gentleman who killed several enemies. The Lord saved us from prison. If they hadn't arrived in time, that group would have definitely set fire to the Chitong Hall. They would have smoked the ancestors underground out." The old mayor said that the moment Lei Zhen got into trouble, he had a premonition. So, he sealed off the underground world. But regarding secret matters, he still seemed hesitant. "How can I be sure you two haven't been bought off by the other side, and are putting on this act together, just to trick me out of Lei Zhen's secret?" My mother stepped in front of me without hesitation, and declared loudly, "Quan Lan isn't that kind of person. He's my son. He would never betray his hometown. But you haven't seen each other for over 10 years. People's hearts can change." The old mayor paced back and forth with his cane. Just then, old Jiang pulled a notebook from his pocket. It was from that day in Shoshui village. The patterns of the 6 legendary beasts copied from the bronze painting. The old mayor was shocked when he saw the patterns. Someone next to him asked, "Isn't this the tattoo on our backs? Where did you get this?" The old mayor asked in a low voice. Instead, he called out to old Jiang. Old Jiang no longer hid it, and carefully took out that human skin scroll. "This is yours. My ancestor, Wen Tao, the Tomb Raider King, left these notes. They describe a fragrance known throughout the land, but no one can recognize it. Yet, it's our only chance to break the curse. Do you still doubt us?" The 18th truth. Looking at that paper, thin as a cicada's wing, yet it exuded an eerie aura, inside and out. The person who cried eerily, his exhausted, long expression froze. I only heard him say in a trembling voice, "Taiwan. This really has been lost for several years." After a long pause, Taiwan finally reacted. He asked where old Jiang and I had obtained it from. I no longer hid it, and told him how we killed that bloodthirsty demon in Shoshui village. How I opened the copper painting. I explained everything in detail. The old village chief's expression changed completely, and the way he looked at me was different. Jin Lan, I never thought that after you left Lei Zhen, you would have such an extraordinary experience. Could it be that everything is destined? It seems the prophecy is true. Lei Zhen is finally saved. The old village chief muttered to himself. Old Jiang and I looked at the old village chief together. I asked, confused, "What?" At that moment, the old village chief no longer held any hostility. Instead, he came over kindly and patted my head. He said, "Good child." It completely threw me off guard, because the way he addressed me was filled with reverence. The old village chief is the most senior person in the entire Lei clan. His word is law. I'm just a kid who ran away. Why would he revere me? Old Jiang continued pressing the original question, asking the clan leader what kind of curse Lei Zhen was afflicted with. This time, the old man no longer hid the truth. Instead, he leaned on his cane and sat down. He slowly said that it all started with our ancestor, Wen Tao. Wen Tao started as a grave robber. Later, after saving the emperor, he became a general with military power. He also trained a team of invincible grave robbers. They were known as the Heavenly Justice and were unmatched in skill. The Juezi army. He led the Juezi army to raid countless ancient tombs, and obtained countless treasures, but, upon entering a mysterious pyramid, they suffered a terrifying curse from the underworld. At the time, to save Wen Tao, the Juezi army suffered heavy casualties, although Wen Tao survived, but he contracted a strange disease. He started to become photosensitive. Whenever his skin was exposed to sunlight, it would blister and fester, so he had to become reclusive. As his condition worsened, every night, Wen Tao would toss and turn in bed in agony. He often cries out, holding his forehead, as if something is growing out of it. It hurts so much, it itches. He even scratches the center of his forehead, until it's a bloody mess. The maid screams in shock. Wen Tao's diet is also undergoing drastic changes. He could no longer stomach cooked meat and vegetables. Instead, he developed a craving for raw meat, especially bloody meat, freshly cut from the animal. That was what he liked most. Once, he even ate his pet parrot alive. The maid saw Wen Tao bite into the parrot's neck, blood spilling from the corners of his mouth, but his face wore an evil smile. It made them feel that the master before them was no longer human. Instead, he was a monster that crawled out of hell. Wen Tao no longer drank clean water. Only blood could pass his lips. He no longer ate anything else. He only fed on raw meat. Once he stops eating these things, his body will continue to deteriorate. And the most important thing is, Wen Tao's forehead actually grew a third eye. At that time, rumors spread among the escaped servants that Wen Tao had transformed into a monster. Adding to this, Wen Tao held military power, and could overthrow the throne at any moment. This made the emperor determined to eliminate him. Fortunately, before Wen Tao died, he left a final wish for his 500 most trusted Juezi soldiers to take his children and flee Luoyang. This group evaded countless pursuits, and finally found a secluded paradise, but they never expected. I'd only settled down for a few years, when a bigger nightmare emerged. They also had a sort of curse, like an incubator. After repeated analyses, they finally pinpointed the commonality. Everyone who entered that tomb was afflicted with a severe curse. Secondly, this curse is incurable. It will manifest when they reach 40 years old. They began to experience the same pain as Tong Wen Tao, the same mutation. Some even committed suicide because they couldn't bear it, but many more continued to uphold their mission. But later they discovered that this curse would spread to the next generation. Just like the old saying, those who steal foundations harm their own virtue or their children. Jin Lan, you're not old enough to understand. You can't comprehend the horror of this curse reversal. The old mayor wiped away a tear, and removed the black cloth from his forehead. A grotesque, demonic eye was revealed there. He slowly said, your forehead will become like ours, growing a third eye. You, too, will become like us. Because they fear the light, they dwell underground. Hearing these words, I couldn't help but look at my mother. Mother nodded at me, tears in her eyes. Yes, it was because of the calamity of 4, that your father and I were dragged into the ancestral hall. The curse backlash had already started. Your father and I were rolling on the ground in agony. It was Elder May 7, At that moment, I suddenly remembered a week before the incident, seeing my father gnawing on a wild dog, his face covered in blood. I also remembered how my mother had completely covered herself before going out. Everything seemed to make sense. The old editor-in-chief continued, Jin Lan, do you know why we migrated to so many places, and finally settled in Lasian? Because Lasian has a very special natural environment. It thunders for half of every month. Back then, our ancestors erected 76 stone sculptures of mythical beasts in Lasian and also erected this giant bronze rod to store and nourish the thunder. We directed the lightning to the ground, using the power of the lightning's force to suppress the curse on us. But that curse is truly terrifying. So terrifying that even the lightning can only alleviate the strange illness on us. Year after year, generation after generation, we've used every method. None of them can completely eradicate this vicious curse. What about my father? I asked. Old Zhang sighed sadly, unable to meet my eyes. The 9 methods of Su Yin Yang Lei are not suitable for everyone. Some people will experience reduced pain, while others will suffer immediate backlash. And your father belongs to the latter. I don't know if it's a father-son connection, but I could actually feel at that moment the pain my father was enduring. It felt as if thousands of insects were gnawing at his forehead, like he was being lashed by whips of eternity. And this is clearly something I will experience in the future. I couldn't help but break out in a cold sweat. Old Jiang then patted me on the shoulder. I assured them, since the curse originated from Yin ruins, the solution must also lie within Yin ruins. After saying this, I raised the human skin scroll in my hand. So, as long as we decipher this human skin scroll, we can infiltrate Yin City, and free Lei Zhengjing's lineage from suffering once and for all. Upon hearing this, everyone was stunned. My dejected expression after pleading was instantly replaced by excitement. I looked at the village elder in disbelief. The elder didn't deny it. Old Jiang then got to the point. asking him if he recognized the writing. The village elder stroked his beard, and told us, if I'm not mistaken, "Not bad, this is genuine Taiwan. It's the script used for communication between humans and ghosts." Taiwan first appeared in the Shang dynasty. It was a Shang dynasty sacrificial record. It's based on the patterns of cracked bones after death, a type of script created from those patterns, because they believed that only the dead and ghosts were closest to the sacrificial. They believe that by using iron writing, they can contact the various vengeful spirits floating in the human world. They seek answers from them, such as for favorable rain. In order to fulfill their wishes, they often use blood to write the iron script on massive cliffs, and then kill countless slaves in traps. Mid to late Shang dynasty, the Taiwan script disappeared as well, but the tomb-raiding king, Wen Tao, learned this script. In that strange ancient tomb, he then passed down a secret communication method to his descendants, telling them they would need it one day. Unfortunately, as time passed, we descendants have gradually forgotten the Jiao script. Outsiders know even less about it, because since ancient times, communication between humans and ghosts has been whispered. It's something we don't want outsiders to know. Old Jiang is anxious, so what can we do? No wonder even Qilin couldn't decipher it. It turns out it's truly not a script of this world. Lao Zhang smiled faintly. The atmosphere changed. As it happens, I am the only one left in Lasian who understands the iron script. He looked at Lao Zhang, and said firmly, to help people overcome their difficulties, I am willing to do my utmost to decipher this human skin scroll. Even if it costs me my old life, I will not hesitate. After saying that, he waved his hand at his son. Ming, bring me that black robe. Chapter 19, The Death of the Old Town Mayor, Father. The new town mayor was instantly stunned. He shouted in disbelief. The other Lei Lok residents also tried to persuade the old town mayor. They said that his health was already like this. He wouldn't be able to withstand that ritual. Do as I say. This is fate. The old town chief struck the ground hard with his cane. When the old town chief said this, even though the crowd was reluctant, they could only follow his command with tears in their eyes. I cast a curious glance at the old town chief. His face was covered in age spots. His temples were streaked with gray, but his eyes held an unusual determination. All of this seemed to suggest that deciphering the iron script came at a steep price. What price, exactly? After a stick of incense had burned, the new town mayor arrived with several townspeople. He carried a dark brown, three-pronged object. Two other townspeople, one carrying a feathered crown, the other holding a box of paints. The old mayor stood quietly with his arms outstretched, allowing them to dress him. They painted his face with red, white, and black paint. I looked closely, and saw that on the cloak was embroidered a strange bird with outstretched wings. That strange bird has a round face, sharp teeth, and its feet are perched on a human skull. It looks like a proud general, with many blood-red lines on its sleeves. It has a particularly eerie feeling. Old Jiang quietly told me that the bird is called a chicken. It's the owl. It was the shamanic spirit medium of the Shang dynasty. They believed the owl was the messenger of the night. It could bring them the will of the spirits. After the old mayor changed into his black robes, he raised his cane high. In that moment, it seemed as if all the ailments in his body disappeared. He walked with the stride of a tiger and dragon, but the locked-up people around cried even louder. The old town mayor turned around and gave them a deep look. Then, with determination, he prepared to climb the soft ladder, and walk toward the outside world. One by one, townspeople began to descend. They couldn't bear to leave the old mayor, but the old mayor only turned to them and said, "Do not mourn for me. I'm just an old man, with one foot in the grave. Being able to do something good for Lei Zhen before I go, is my honor." He walked on the sharp stones, each step calm and unhurried, like a hero preparing for sacrifice. Old Jiang and I, and the new mayor, quietly followed behind the old mayor. The remaining residents of Thunder Town, unable to leave the underground, could only burn incense and pray for the old mayor. After leaving the underground world, a wisp of white smoke immediately rose from the old mayor's neck. A faint burning smell also filled the air. The new mayor blushed. He bit his lip hard, tears falling silently. Every step Lao Zhang took was difficult. Lao Zhang and I couldn't bear to watch. We wanted to help him, but Lao Zhang waved us off, saying, "Hurry to the village hall." He then entered the ancestral hall. The areas not covered by the black clothing had all turned yellow from the burns. Yet, not a single sound of pain escaped. Although the outer perimeter of the ancestral hall was severely damaged by the fire, the buildings inside remained intact. The old town chief stood before the densely packed ancestral tablets, putting on a mask with green face and ape-like fangs. He picked up something resembling a rattle, and began to dance a strange, back-and-forth dance. Old Jiang explained to me in my ear that the drawing on the mask is also that rattle drum. I asked, "Isn't that a rattle drum?" "No, that's not a rattle drum," Old Jiang answered. "That's called a sitao." A small drum from the Shang dynasty. The drumhead is made from an infant's skin, and the drumstick is made from an infant's shin bone. This is a tool specifically used to communicate with ghosts. Due to its spiritual medium nature, living people cannot enter casually. We three can only stay outside the inquiry hall. We saw the old town mayor respectfully spread out the 7 human skin scrolls. Each time he recited a line of the iron script, he would sway the temple bell and perform a strange dance. The sound emitted at the start of the dance was quite normal, just like an ordinary rattle, but after a while, I felt something was wrong. The sound started getting sharper, and more piercing. It was as if a group of ghosts, truly summoned, were entering the ancestral hall. In my mind, it was as if a strange scene appeared. There were several men dressed in animal skins. They were using a large cauldron to cook a dead skull. Then, they gathered around the cauldron, singing ancient chants, and performing a strange dance. As the ritual deepened, cracks began to appear on the dead skull. The cracks formed characters that were exactly the iron script. I don't know why I saw that scene. All I know is the sounds around me grew louder and louder, like countless little ghosts were with the old man, dancing and whispering. In an instant, the sky outside the hall turned dark. I couldn't see those ghosts, but I clearly heard what they were saying. "Kid, wake up." Old John's sudden voice pulled me from my nightmare. When I came to, I found my forehead covered in sweat. "What's wrong with me?" I asked in a daze. Mayor Xian explained from the side. "The Li family blood runs through your veins. You're naturally sensitive to these things. It's inevitable that something might happen the first time you encounter them." I briefly described what I just saw, just a short summary, but Mayor Xian was shocked. "What? You actually saw images of the sacrificial rites? How is that possible?" I made a sound of agreement, indicating that besides that, I also heard many little ghosts whispering. The new warden stared at me in shock, his jaw hanging open. Finally, he uttered a strange sentence. Could it be that Tianwen has chosen you?" "Chosen me? What do you mean?" Old Jiang and I exchanged a glance. We looked at the new town mayor. The new mayor's expression became quite complicated. He said that Tianwen is very difficult to learn, because only the chosen one can hear the gods and spirits speak. Since my father was the last person who knew Tianwen, he was afraid our ancestors' traditions would be lost. He tried everything to teach me. But no matter how many memorial rituals I performed, I couldn't hear a single word. I don't have the gift. In the end, I had to give up. I never thought, Jin Lan, oh Jin Lan. Now, I finally understand why father was willing to sacrifice himself. I'm taking a gamble on you. Perhaps the curse that has plagued Raiden for centuries can truly end in your hands. Xinjiang said excitedly. I wanted to keep asking, but just then, a sudden, shrill scream came from within the hall. The old town mayor suddenly vomited after a day's delay, and it splashed onto the human skin scroll. He himself also collapsed, unable to hold himself up. The temple offering in his hand rolled to the side. The sacrificial ceremony was interrupted. The new town mayor rushed in panic. Old Jiang and I followed closely behind. However, just as we were about to help the old town mayor up, but I found his body was burning hot. Blood seeped through the mask and down the old mayor's neck. The old mayor, his breath faint, said, "Help me up." We didn't dare delay in returning underground. Old Jiang immediately hoisted the old mayor onto his back. Using superior lightness skill, he leaped back towards the underground without touching the ground. After putting the human skin scroll into my pocket, I quickly followed. Back in the dark space, the old mayor finally felt some relief. But after he took off his mask, we discovered his entire face was disfigured. The other residents quickly brought cold water and ice to cool him down, telling him he had worked hard, while comforting him that he would be alright. The new mayor helped the old mayor drink several cups of medicinal soup. After more than half an hour, old Soa finally squeezed out those iron inscriptions. I've already deciphered half of them. By tomorrow I'll be able to decipher them all. Ah Ming, help me back to my room. Seeing the old mayor getting better each day, old Jiang and I couldn't bear to rush him. The old mayor will tell us the results when he's ready. We just want him to recover first. Old Jiang said to me, according to Master Ji's divination, you were also one of the chosen by Tingwen. When you have a chance later, you can learn from the old mayor. This way, I'll have a living translator. I asked old Jiang what the benefit was. Old Jiang rolled his eyes and said, that way you can walk sideways in Qilin, right? And show fourth sister and the others whose disciple is the best. I thought, that's true. He added, wouldn't they say, this disciple you took on is really worth it. Mom hadn't seen me for a while, so she pulled me back to her room. She said she'd make me steamed preserved fish. The underground buildings are basically the same as those above ground. They all have flat roofs. I started a fire. My mother was cooking. He asked me what my relationship with old Jiang was. I said old Jiang was my master. My mother said I'd been mischievous since I was little. You should learn from your master properly, and never cause trouble. I said with a smile, don't worry. I'm not only a university graduate now, but I also work for a secret organization. Everything I do is for the country and the people. I chatted with my mother for a long time, catching up. Even late into the night, I didn't want to go to sleep, because this time I'm leaving. I really don't know when I'll be able to come back. As a result, I didn't expect to be woken up early by a constant knocking sound. There were also waves of crying outside. When I went out, I learned that something had happened to the old town mayor. The 20th terror tape recorder. Old Jiang and I exchanged glances, then put on our clothes and headed to the old town mayor's house. On the way back, we both felt incredibly guilty. We thought it was highly likely that because of us, the old mayor's condition worsened and he died. After all, at that time, the old mayor's complexion was, one could say, extremely poor. When we arrived at the old mayor's house, a large group of people had already gathered. The Malaysian residents, dressed in black. Seeing their pain made my heart ache even more. From inside the house came the new mayor's wails. Faced with his father's sudden passing, he was clearly devastated. I pushed open the door, trembling, originally intending to apologize. But suddenly, I widened my eyes, because I saw the old town mayor's corpse. He didn't die of illness. He was murdered. The body still maintained the position of leaning on the table. A dagger was lodged in his back. Who could have dealt this fatal blow? I gritted my teeth and said. Old Jiang quickly went over to check. He found that at the top, there was actually a carving of a lifelike scorpion. Zhao's hand was already self-explanatory. In my mind, the image immediately appeared. The beautiful young woman disguised as a blind old woman, the one who could topple a nation with her beauty. Your heart is so venomous. I couldn't help but clench my fists. I swore through gritted teeth that I would kill you. I'll use your head to appease Lei Zhen's wronged soul. Besides the wound from the Noyan blade on his back, there's another fatal wound on his long neck. His hand was also bleeding. Plus, judging by the traces left at the scene, the experienced old Jiang quickly made a judgment. At that time, old Chang must have been writing overnight, using the text he deciphered during the day. He didn't notice at all. A district man quietly sneaked into the room. He must have used a knife to stab old town chief in the back. He wanted to steal that document, but he didn't expect old Chang to still be alive. But he clutched the manuscript tightly. Qianshik drew another dagger and slit his throat. He took the general's manuscript. What are we going to do? The old mayor is the only one in the world who can decipher the text. I couldn't help but worry. This is what the old mayor traded his life for. Are we just going to let District 7 get away with this? What about Lei Zhen's curse? The new mayor also became anxious. Did my father sacrifice himself for nothing? I told Lao Jiang to quickly think of a solution. Aren't you the Black Blade Qilin? You must have a way. Old Jiang never expected something like this would happen. He anxiously pressed his temples. At that moment, the corner of old Jiang's eye caught sight of the feather pen on the table, and the thick stack of blank paper. He suddenly exclaimed in delight. I have the ability to restore the writing of the old town head. I don't quite understand what Lao Jiang means. Tell him to explain it clearly. Lao Jiang carefully held the joss paper up to the light for me to examine closely. Under the light, I could see lines appearing on the paper, but they weren't very clear. Old Jiang told me that when the old mayor was writing, he must have placed the blotting paper on top, and since he was using a quill pen, the nib was very hard. So, besides the paper he was writing on, the top sheet actually also had the writing imprinted on it. Old Jiang suddenly pulled a small glass bottle from his pocket. He poured the graphite powder onto the paper. Then he instructed the new mayor to fetch a basin of clean water. After the new mayor did as he was told, old Jiang placed the paper into the water. He waited quietly for about half an hour. When old Jiang, smiling, told me to look at the basin, I was utterly stunned, because floating on the surface of the water, on the paper, like magic, dense black characters started appearing. Lao Jiang quickly took out his notebook to copy them down, but as he wrote, his expression grew serious. Even his hand holding the pen began to tremble. He was actually scared. I quickly went over to him, but old Jiang blocked me. Master, have you forgotten what you promised me before we came? I reminded him. Old Jiang closed his laptop with his back to me and said, don't worry, I'll tell you when we get back. Just as I wanted to ask further, Mayor Xian suddenly yelled, saying that at his father's bedside, I discovered something odd that didn't belong to Ray. Old Jiang and I hurried into the parlor. We saw the new mayor, examining a rectangular box. He turned it over and over. The box was army green, and had several small buttons on it. It was the new mayor's first time seeing such a thing. We suspect it likely fell off the murderer. After all, there's no way Lei Zhen could have something like this. Old Jiang and I both suddenly realized something. The next day, we both shouted at the same time, a tape recorder. Seeing the new town mayor's confusion, I explained, this is a foreign-made pocket tape recorder. It can record and playback a person's voice, but this thing is very expensive. Only certain special agents use it. Xiong Feng's identity must be extraordinary. Old Jiang let out a cold laugh. I suppose this is a gift he left us. What do you mean? I looked over, puzzled. Old Jiang didn't answer. He just pressed the recorder's button. The new mayor was startled that such a small device could make a sound. It really gave the new mayor a fright. Old Jiang and I both perked up our ears. Because the murderer left this recorder, he must have wanted to tell us something. At first, there was a static crackling sound from the recorder. GX immediately following, a group of people were talking. This simple tomb is the biggest discovery of the century. If we can excavate it successfully, this ancient tomb will surely go down in history. Captain Lin, you're going to be famous. No, history will remember everyone from Hajin. Suddenly the conversation was interrupted by something. The people in the recording seemed to be running. They were running and stumbling, as if something were chasing them. Mixed in were hysterical screams, and piercing wails of agony. What is that? That is hell. Amidst the cries for help, I thought I heard some strange music playing. Mixed in with it were the sounds of those little ghosts whispering, which I heard during the day. It seemed like something was trying to crawl out of the tape recorder. My head started to hurt again. Grimacing, I wanted old Jiang to turn off the recorder. But just then, the eerie music stopped abruptly. A man's sinister voice, like a sudden ghost, rang out from the recorder. I know what you did back then. What happened back then? Back then, when I was still completely clueless. Old Jiang's face went completely white, as if the voices, it was someone he feared most in his life. He swayed and collapsed to the ground. I quickly turned off the recorder. But it took several minutes before a trace of color returned to old Jiang's face. He grabbed my hand, and urgently cried, "Quick, we must return to Qilin immediately." His lips moved, and he seemed to age several years in an instant. I had just reunited with my mother, and I didn't expect to have to part so soon. But mother understood. She said I'd grown up, and naturally, I needed to make my own way in the world. "Jean Lan, don't worry, I'll take care of myself. Mother, I'll await your return." I nodded firmly. I bowed deeply to my mother. I straightened up, unexpectedly. When I said I would leave Leijin the next day, the new mayor asked me to wait. Then he stuffed a cloth bundle into my hand. "What's this?" I asked. "My father entrusted this to me last night. In case anything happened to him, he wanted me to give it to you." The new mayor smiled. "This is also the token of every generation of mayors. From today onwards, you are Leijin's elder." This sentence startled me. I hurriedly unwrapped the cloth package, and found an ancient thread-bound book inside, a genealogy of the Leijin clan. There was also an envelope, with "sworn siblings" written on it. I opened the letter. As I write this, I suddenly find myself speechless. "Jean Lan, when you read this letter, I will be gone. But I still want to talk to you from the bottom of my heart. In the Lei family genealogy, there's a prophecy written. It says a chosen child will appear. Let us out of this mediocre dream, and break the curse of stagnation. Generations of our people have waited and waited, until today. I'm thrilled to discover that you are the chosen one. I know I'm not worthy to name you, but I hope you will become the next mayor. Save the people here. Please accept this 36 Secrets of Moving Mountains and Seas. This is the lifetime experience of our ancestors in tomb raiding." Every word written by the old master is filled with deep emotion. Even though he knew he would never live to see the day the curse is lifted, he still sincerely wished that the people of Leijin could live in peace and prosperity. For this, he was willing to endure pain and leave the underworld. He would sacrifice his own life for this. Because he saw hope in that chosen child. He saw hope. Such a selfless elder. And I wronged him for over 10 years. I couldn't control my sobbing. I swore I would personally avenge him, but I couldn't bring myself to become the mayor. Good watch. Leijin will remain under his control for now, but I am Leijin's eternal leader. The next day, Lao Jiang and I boarded a small boat, with Leijin's troops. Big White Tiger, whom I hadn't seen for days, didn't seem to recognize my voice, and jumped straight into my arms, meowing at me a few times, as if asking me where I was going. I didn't answer. Instead, I gently stroked his head. I gazed at the sky, where a light rain had begun to fall, lost in thought. Chapter 21, Moving Mountains and Filling Seas, Part 36, The Thunderbolt Incident. It all felt like a dream. Mother was still alive, and he was still waiting for me to come home. Old Lokchang said I'm the chosen one. Only I can break Leijin's curse. I couldn't help but touch my forehead. I wonder if my 40-year-old self will really grow a third eye. Traveling all night long, old Jiang and I finally caught up with the bus. Because there were still dozens of hours left on the bus, so I started looking through the keepsake the old town mayor left me, 36 Stratagems of Moving Mountains and Filling Seas. It said this was written by our ancestor Wen Xiang Luzheng. It contains his lifelong tomb raiding wisdom. As soon as I opened the first page, I was thrilled. This book actually categorized tomb raiding into finding the dragon and pinpointing the acupoint. Observe the heart, forget the breath. The 36 key techniques of breaking the coffin, slaying the tiger, and butchering the dragon. This one Tao even boasted that if a descendant of the Li family could learn even one technique, they would have endless benefits for the rest of their life. I have to say, the 36 ultimate techniques of moving mountains and filling seas have a certain magic, making it impossible for me to put them down once I've picked them up. Even though Lao Jiang called me a few times, I didn't hear him. Mainly because I discovered that the archaeology textbooks I studied before, and those confidential Qilin files about compass directions, could all be integrated and understood through Ishan Tianhai 36 Ju. It's like the supreme martial arts from comic books, suddenly opening up all my meridians. Letting go of all moves is better than having moves. I secretly admired Wentao in my heart. No wonder he's the king of tomb raiders. If one masters all the skills in the book, there really wouldn't be a tomb they couldn't enter. Of course, there were many things I didn't understand along the way. Whenever that happened, I would always ask Old Jiang to explain it to me. Old Jiang was exhausted and starving, seeing stars. By the time we got back to the Qilin unit, we were both completely worn out. Old Jiang immediately took the iron text and the tape recorder, and went straight up to the 4th floor in the elevator. He said it was an extremely urgent matter, and he had to report to his superiors immediately. Someone at my level isn't qualified to go to the 4th floor. I can only wait on the 1st floor. I waited for over 7.5 hours. Old Jiang finally finished the work. I held my stomach. I urged him, hurry up and go to the canteen. I'm starving. I'm about to die of hunger. Old Jiang touched his stomach. I couldn't take it anymore. We immediately went to the living quarters on the 2nd floor. But the timing wasn't ideal. The cafeteria was already empty at this hour. Not a single grain of rice was left. My stomach grumbled unhappily. I realized I had been so engrossed in reading on the train that I hadn't eaten or drunk anything all day. My eyes were turning green with hunger. Fortunately, Lao Jiang is a straightforward guy. He immediately offered to drive me to a restaurant in downtown Beiping. I want mutton hot pot. I unhesitatingly took Lao Jiang up on his offer. Lao Jiang readily agreed, saying I'd made a huge contribution this time, and he'd find me whatever I wanted to eat, even if it meant catching rare birds and exotic beasts. However, just as we were about to leave, but suddenly I smelled an enticing aroma of food. The hunger pangs in my stomach were immediately aroused. I followed the scent. I discovered it was coming from the conference room. I peeked through the crack in the door. Although the conference room was empty at the time, 2 complete and delicious meals were laid out on the table. There was meat, vegetables, and a bowl of jade tofu soup. One of the plates even has a big, juicy chicken leg on it. Look, master. I opened the door and said, what do you mean, no food? They were clearly trying to surprise us. Considering our great contributions at Lijo, they've specially prepared 7 small stoves for us. Old Jiang also nodded. I bet it was Director Lin who prepared this. He's just tough on the outside but soft on the inside. After saying that, he started eating. He even lit a cigarette. I quickly reminded him. Isn't smoking prohibited here? Have you forgotten last time's lesson? What do you know? Old Jiang nonsensically said we're heroes now. It's so lifelike. Wow, this chicken leg is really delicious. I couldn't help but exclaim in admiration. My insides were about to dance with joy. However, just then, I keenly sensed a clear, pleasant jingle of bells rang out from outside, but I was too hungry at that moment to pay it any mind. Then the meeting room door opened, and a figure stormed in, yelling, "What are you doing?" I took a big bite of meat, and looked back. A girl of about 16 years old could be seen, dressed in a short, turquoise outfit. A silver bell was tied around her ankle, and she wore several thin silver rings on her wrist. She carried a large bamboo basket on her back. The basket was tightly covered, and its contents were unknown. It was a meter tall and a meter wide. Masako looked even smaller than a young girl. The girl slammed the chili sauce in her hand down on the table, and pointed at me ferociously. Where did this thieving scoundrel come from? Give me back my chicken leg. Looking closely, I found her to be extremely beautiful. A delicate nose, lively eyes. His features have an exotic charm, unique to ethnic minorities. Even with his cheeks puffed out in a huff, he just looks incredibly cute. I'm asking you something. Seeing I didn't react, the girl took another step forward. She yelled at me. I was just about to explain, when the chicken leg in my mouth fell to the ground. The girl with the bell looked at the chicken leg, then at me, and suddenly erupted like a volcano. I quickly looked to Lao Jiang for help, wanting to ask him who this girl was. But Lao Jiang also looked terrified. He actually hid behind me so shamelessly. This Master Ho has never been reliable. I even suspect he bought his black sword. Luckily, the girl's attention was attracted by Old Jiang, and Old Jiang kept using me as a shield. Just then, Big Tiger suddenly meowed. The killing intent in the girl's eyes vanished instantly. He cupped his face in his hands. His eyes were sparkling. Such a cute kitty. Just as he reached out to pet it, I swatted his hand away. No touching. Then I deliberately called out to Dahu. Dahu jumped onto my shoulder, rubbing her soft cheek against my chin. The girl, seeing this, stamped her foot, and puffed out her cheeks angrily. Pointing at my nose, she shouted, you bad person. I ignored her, and prepared to leave, holding the cat. But the girl shouted, stop, you ate my food. He even slapped my hand, and then left just like that. I laughed and said, these 2 meals don't have your name on them. What does that mean? Go to the road, Lon. I said that when old Jiang took charge, things would improve. His expression finally improved a little. Compensate me with 5 meals. Old Jiang's bluffing. Ask him if 4 meals will do. The young lady shakes her head. Make it 10, anytime, anywhere. And I want my favorite candied preserved dates. My little princess. I'll put it all on my tab. Old Jiang's putting on a show. It really makes me wonder who's actually his apprentice. You know, old Jiang has always been incredibly stingy with me. Wouldn't part with a single penny. He's really changed his tune this time. Surprisingly generous. As the young woman was leaving, old Jiang shamelessly saw her off. Give my regards to your master for me. The girl from Harling ignored him. Old Jiang, however, smiled so widely his eyes disappeared. I glared at old Jiang with a face full of resentment. Are you still the Black Blade, Kirin? Old Jiang didn't indulge me. Coldly, he placed his hand on his waist. What's wrong? Do you want to know if it's my blade? I felt a chill at the back of my neck. I quickly buried my head in my food, but I felt strange. Just who was that girl? She actually managed to impress old Jiang. Feng Su mentioned old Jiang offering to send his regards to her. Could it be that her master is someone important? After finishing the meal, old Jiang went back to work. Let me wait for the news. I went back to my room and gave Big Tiger a hearty meal. Then I planned to sleep while holding the cat. Ji woke me up. He told me that there was an emergency meeting at 3 p.m. in the conference hall. Since I am the executor of this task, I was allowed to attend as an exception. His face was extremely pale. His brows were furrowed. This foreshadowed that the meeting wouldn't be simple. I keenly sensed that the contents of the iron letter might be terrifying. So terrifying that even Qilin wasn't confident. When I left this afternoon, I purposely didn't bring Dahua, but I ended up on the 2nd floor, and ran right into that bell girl. He was still carrying that giant bamboo basket, and he made a show of shaking his little fist at me. Petty thief, I thought. I have thousands of pets. He mysteriously pulled a bamboo tube out of the basket. He opened the lid and shouted, you said so, right? Mao Mao saw that there was nothing in the bamboo scroll. I ignored him. I walked directly toward the conference hall. Unlike last time with just the 3 of us, this time, the conference hall was actually packed with people, and most of these people had identities that gave me a shock. The majority of them were dangerous. They are all wearing a full-color Kirin badge. This is the symbol of the Kirin spirit. There are even 4 or 5 Black Blade Kirin among them. Helan Shui is also there. I see that only Lao Jiang and Helan Shui have empty seats next to them. I quickly walk over and sit in the empty seat. However, as soon as I sit down properly, my body starts to itch unbearably. Unable to hold back, I let out a series of chuckles. Old Jiang coughed at me several times. He gestured for me to be quiet, but I just couldn't control myself. It wasn't until old Jiang was thoroughly enraged that he warned me in a low voice, kid, look at who has come today. Don't embarrass me. I grimaced at Lao Jiang, who was scratching his armpit. Just then, Helan Shui seemed to sense something, and softly called out, Yin Linghua. As soon as she spoke, the bell I just bumped into, the young woman skipped, lightly hopping into the conference hall. Old Jiang finally understood what was happening. He took out a packet of white powder, and blew some of it on the places where I was itching unbearably. While blowing, he said, my God, how did you offend that little miss again? I didn't know what the powder was. But the itching on my body immediately subsided a lot. I quickly looked towards the mastermind. The young girl sat proudly beside Helan Shui. She affectionately called out, Master. Helan Shui, however, coldly warned Yin Linger. That person is your Uncle Zhang's disciple, Li Jinlan. From now on, don't prank him again. The young girl stuck out her tongue. Uncle Jiang just smiled. It's fine, it's fine. Young people, it's normal to play around. It's normal for them to mess around. I suddenly glared at Lao Jiang, realizing that my feelings are no longer with you. You don't care. But Lao Jiang kicked me. He gestured for me to hurry up and greet Helan Shui. Then I looked at the instigator, who was acting all high and mighty. I knew that these two had completely settled things. The 22nd death note. But my impression of Helan Shui is very good. After all, in Shoshui village, we all fought side by side. I politely greeted him with 7 nods. Helan Shui slightly nodded. Not bad. You've improved a lot since the last time I saw you. I humbly said, oh, not at all. But I was secretly delighted. Seeing my master praising someone else so lavishly. Yin Linger sat down next to me, pouting. She deliberately placed the large bamboo basket beside her. Faintly, I heard a strange buzzing sound coming from inside. It startled me so much I almost slipped off my chair. Lao Jiang quickly caught me. I was about to complain, but he shushed me. At that moment, the doors to the conference hall opened, and an elderly man in a Zhongshan suit was wheeled in slowly. The old man looked to be in his 50s or 60s, appearing thin and frail, but every gesture exudes a powerful aura, especially his eyes. They are simply radiant. I wanted to identify him by the items he was wearing, but I found he wasn't wearing an elf insignia. He also didn't have a black sword at his waist. Who is he? Just as I was feeling puzzled, everyone present stood up in unison. Even Lao Jiang and the other Black Kirin members showed their respect. I couldn't help but nudge Lao Jiang's arm and ask why it wasn't Director Lin this time. Lao Jiang quickly covered my mouth and said in alarm, "Kid, shut up." The mysterious old man's eyes flashed. A beam of light, like a flying knife, shot towards me. Then he sat at the head of the long table. At that moment, I made a discovery. There was a black wood chair carved with a qilin. It was different from our chairs. This immediately made me realize that this mysterious old man's identity was extraordinary. After the old man sat down, he said in a low voice, "I've called everyone here today because I received an urgent report from Lao Jiang. It seems something has happened to the Yin Su archaeological team." These words sent shockwaves through the room, leaving everyone present stunned. Wasn't the Yin Su archaeology team perfectly fine? They were excavating within the safe zone we designated. It's impossible that they encountered any danger. Then please listen to this recording. The old man took out the recording device we brought back from the Thunder Array. He pressed the play button. Even though it wasn't the first time I heard this recording, but the archaeologists' cries for help inside, the stumbling and running sounds, and the strange music, permeating the whole thing, still made my blood run cold. The recorder continuously emitted a scratching sound, as if a group of ghosts were chasing those archaeologists, and then devour them one by one. Everyone present is an expert. How could they not hear the strangeness within? In an instant, everyone's face turned deathly pale. Someone couldn't help but ask, "What's going on? Where did this terrifying recording come from? How can you prove it's from the Yin Ruins archaeological team? What on earth did they dig up at the archaeological site, leading to the annihilation of the entire army?" The elder waved his hand, restoring calm to the conference hall. On this very day, after voice comparison, we've at least confirmed that one of the voices in the recording is Lin Zhenya, captain of the Yin Ruins archaeological team. We tried to contact Director Ho of the Hunan Archaeological Institute by phone, but were told that a week earlier, the archaeological team at the Yin Ruins had an incident. As to what exactly happened, they kept beating around the bush, but repeatedly begged Qilin to help. I know Director Ho very well. To those who think too highly of themselves, even with a knife to his throat, he wouldn't lower his head to me. This time, suddenly seeking help from the Qilin, the situation will be even worse than imagined. "So, what you mean is?" a Qilin member cautiously asked. The elder said, "But before that, I have some good news. Old Jiang has brought back the deciphered Taiwan, although it's only half. It's a godsend for us." After saying this, the old man turned on the projector. Lines of dense text immediately appeared on the screen. Even though old Jiang meticulously copied it by hand, the content within gave everyone present an extremely strong visual shock, because it was unexpectedly the Death Note, written by the tomb raiding king, Wen Tao, in the first year of Tiancheng. Wen Tao accidentally obtained a mysterious ancient scroll. It records a lost royal city. This royal city lies buried beneath the wasteland. Countless treasures are hidden inside. There are also deadly traps. Wen Tao, who loved tomb raiding, was immediately captivated. He believed it to be the greatest challenge in the world. So, he led 10,000 elite soldiers to Anyang, Hunan. He never imagined that this would become his lifelong nightmare. In February 6th of the following year, Wen Tao dug 3 feet into the ground near the Yin ruins, but still found nothing. In the end, with the help of the mysterious Mu Liao house, he used the different directions of the ghostly signs in spring, summer, and autumn, and finally found the true entrance of Ban Su. Wen Tao also carefully documented the method of finding the entrance, recording it in detail, including the 4 symbols deduction, the 3 origins left position, and so on. Seeing this, I suddenly remembered the 36 stratagems of moving mountains and filling seas that I have. It records the ancient tombs of the deceased. They often correspond to the constellations in the sky, drawing upon celestial power to maintain the immortality of the dynasty. The heavenly emperor's bedchamber is called the Purple Garden. Officials in the court call it Taiwei Garden. The common people in the market call it Tianshi Garden. Both are collectively referred to as the 3 primordial locations. The Yin ruins are not simply a large tomb, but a lost royal city. It perfectly corresponds to the 3 primordial locations. Before descending into the tomb, Wen Tao was full of confidence. He even boasted that he would make 10,000 of his men rich for life. This was met with cheers from his troops. But after entering the Yin ruins, Wen Tao's handwriting began to change. He could no longer record the date. Instead, it became a series of fragmented sentences. How is this possible? Day 1. I lost over 300 men. Behind the first door, it was all red devils. That sound was chasing us. It wanted to chase us to the ends of the earth. The trees were laden with the fruit of dead men. The bronze vessel opened its eyes to us. We bowed again and again. Rivers of blood flowed. The further we go, the more I can see the deep humiliation in Wen Tao's words. And endless fear. King Daitaji. For the first time, I felt what it means to be at a loss. The curse of retreat, we all suffered casualties from the curse of retreat. Slowly turning into ghosts. Becoming his puppet. I must come back alive. And break this curse. Wen Tao's notebook is right here. I know this is only half of the iron script text, but the shock it brought me is extraordinary. Wen Tao did lead Juezi Jun to the Yin Su entrance on the winter solstice, and they successfully entered the tomb. But the result wasn't a triumphant return, but the casualties were severe. They also suffered the curse of misfortune. But what he saw, was it really from that era? Why would bronze artifacts have eyes? Why would trees bear fruit made of human remains? After the screening, the elder said, this text was extremely hard to obtain, because a mysterious force has taken control of him. They even invaded Lasian because of this. Fortunately, old Jiang was there, and his new disciple, Li Quan. Otherwise, the consequences would have been unimaginable. So this mission is extremely difficult. We not only need to guard against that mysterious force, but also figure out what exactly happened in Yincheng. The danger level has reached 7 SSS. The old man's single sentence made everyone present gasp again. My heart skipped a beat. God, dealing with the blood curse in Shushui village, almost cost old Jiang and me our lives. Just how terrifying are these 3 S-classes? I also have a bad feeling about this. This job isn't going to fall on me again, is it? I glanced at Lao Jiang, and found him looking down, trying to avoid eye contact. Speak of the devil. The old man asked with a smile, in your opinion, who would be best suited for this mission? Almost half of the people looked at Lao Jiang. I immediately thought, I'm screwed. One of the black blade Qilin wearing sunglasses even started recommending him. Didn't Jiang Donghu go down to Yin Su once? He even designated a safe zone for the Yin Su archaeological team. Besides, he's the one who brought back the iron inscription. I think it would be most appropriate for them to try again. The other person nodded and said, as the saying goes, know yourself and your enemy, and you will be victorious in every battle. I turned to look at old Jiang in surprise. Old Jiang had once surpassed Yincheng. Why hadn't he ever told me this? Old Jiang awkwardly coughed once. Can we not bring up what happened back then? It was me and 4th sister who went to Ban City, but that only got us to the outskirts of the 7th Underground Royal City. And what we encountered there, the trauma we experienced, you should know. After Lao Jiang said this, I noticed. Yin Linger also looked at He Lanxue strangely. Clearly, that trip to Yin Su, it's a forbidden zone in Lao Jiang and He Lanxue's minds. Neither of them told anyone, but they're both so skilled. What kind of psychological trauma could they have suffered? I suddenly remembered the last part of the recording. The man's words. I know what you all did back then. The recording that just played. It also seems like this sentence was deliberately cut out. Daoju told me that this sentence is the key to unlocking all the mysteries. Chapter 23. I didn't have time to think about the past. The elder sitting in the center had already made the final decision. This mission will be given to Jiang Donghu and He Lanxue. It's a good opportunity to take your apprentices for some training. He looked at Yin Linger and me with surprise. Are you saying that the coffins in Beiping don't sell well? The elderly man patted his wheelchair and said, you misunderstood me. This time, I only want you to investigate 2 things. First, find out exactly what happened to the Yin Ruins archaeological team. Second, locate the true entrance to the Yin Ruins. Remember, once you find the entrance, return immediately. You must not enter the tomb. But old Jiang hesitated, wanting to say something. The old man said, you should know the rules of the Qilin. If you don't, then why not? The old man was smiling, but the chilling meaning behind it felt as heavy as Mount Tai. Old Jiang immediately shivered. He Lanxue and I stood up. Ji and I shouted in unison, we guarantee we'll complete the mission. Every word we shouted resonated with conviction. Immediately after, old Jiang pulled me up. He had me and Yin Linger make the same promise. After the meeting, everyone watched the old man leave. Their eyes filled with a strange reverence. Even those black Qilin didn't dare speak until the old man was completely out of sight. I didn't expect that after 10 years, Yin Su would still appear. Feng Gu, the black Qilin wearing sunglasses, sighed. Lao Jiang sneered, and replied to Xiao Shen. Why don't you go to such a dangerous place? It's forcing us, master and apprentice, to our deaths. That Shen guy, the black-bladed Kirin, looks much younger than old Jiang. With his long hair tied back, he looks like a carefree wanderer. But that scar by his sunglasses Makes you think he's been through countless life or death situations. He pushes up his sunglasses. Shows how obsessed you are with that place. Outsiders don't know. The boss knows. Even if I don't say anything, you're still the boss's first choice. Chinner, hearing this title. I'm a little speechless. This little friend is seeing the leader of the Qilin for the first time. Xinshen's black blade. Qilin looked at me with interest. I heard your name is Li Jinlan. The only one to survive the trial of Act 1102. Not only did you successfully resolve the Shoshui village incident, but you also helped Lei Zhen through his crisis. It's just a shame, what a shame. I asked curiously. Unfortunately, you have bad luck. You followed a disciple of someone with a bad fate. Do you know how many of his disciples have died over the years? Little Jian raised a finger, intentionally counting. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Old Jiang, hearing this, was practically fuming with rage. He placed his hand on the hilt of the knife at his waist, and said coldly to Shen Xiaoyu, "Want to go outside and fight?" Shen Xiaoyu sat there laughing. "Jinlan, did you see that? Your master has a bad temper. It would have been better if he just dealt with me." Old Jiang has drawn his sword. It's a pity the other guy slipped away so fast. In the blink of an eye, he ran out of the conference room. Old Jiang was so angry, he kept questioning me. Do I look like a hothead? Do I look like someone reckless and brainless? He Lan Xue and the others just stared at this scene. Everyone left the conference hall, but I never planned to indulge him. Instead, I spoke with a clear point. You're not just brave but also smart. Why do you always tell me half the story and leave the rest out? What do you mean? Old Jiang asked. Yin Cheng, have you been there or not? And the tape recorder. Who is the man speaking at the end? I'm going to get to the bottom of this. Lao Zhang's expression immediately turned strange. He stared at me silently for a few seconds and then said, after we get back. Back in my dorm room. Lao Zhang immediately lit a cigarette. Just when I thought he was finished smoking, he lit another one. I was pacing anxiously. Until Lao Zhang smoked almost half a pack. Of hard men, his mood finally stabilized. He slowly took out his wallet. With reddened eyes, looking at a black and white photo tucked inside. 10 years ago, I did go to Yin City. When the Yinshu armor, self-proclaimed Guji Chusher, attacked several members of the archaeological team with poison gas. Their deaths were horrific. The three of us were called upon in this crisis to rush into the tomb and retrieve the national treasures inside. But we were also hit. The traps in the tomb were beyond our imagination. Although we narrowly escaped, yet we lost a companion without getting far, and the organization also lost an elite black blade Kirin as a result. Later, we learned that the tomb was just a ceramic trap on the outskirts of Yin ruins. The true Yin ruins are hundreds of times more terrifying than this. It was only after our warning that the entire archaeological team withdrew. He's your fifth brother's deceased master. Old Jiang said, pointing at the black and white photo. I looked closely, and saw Old Jiang and He Lan Xue in the photo, looking only in their 30s. Between them was a man with a cheerful smile, one arm around Old Jiang's shoulder, and the other around He Lan Xue's. The eyes are clear and pure, very happy. We ventured through ancient tombs together, fought against zombies together. We were closer than real brothers. But people, they can disappear in the blink of an eye. Old Jiang exhales smoke. The smoke lingers on the window. It slowly brought back his longing. Lao Jiang told me that the situation was extremely critical. If he had reached out just a little further, he could have saved him. But it was just that little bit short. He watched with his own eyes as the man was swallowed by the terrifying mechanism. They didn't even recover a single bone. I saw Wu Di fall with my own eyes. 10 years, 7. I never thought I'd hear his voice again. I looked at Lao Jiang in surprise. What? The last man's voice on the recorder is Uncle Wu. Lao Jiang nodded. That's right. It's Wu Di. We've faced life and death together countless times. I'd recognize his voice even if it were reduced to ashes. Could he still be alive? I replayed the recording in my mind. That ghostly, chilling voice. I know what you all did back then. There was no joy of reunion with Lao Jiang in that voice. Only deep resentment. Could it be that there were still some hidden secrets from back then? Is everything really as Lao Jiang said? The other side must be a death trap. Lao Jiang didn't answer my question. Instead, he continued with red-rimmed eyes. He smoked until the last cigarette was gone. I said that Shen Xiaoyu was right. I have an obsession with Yin Su, that godforsaken place. Even if the boss doesn't order me, I'll sneak in. Is number 5 really dead? Why was his voice on the recorder? I have to find an answer, even if it means my death. I need closure. It's also the fourth sister's emotional knot. Old Jiang pointed out the cigarette butt and looked at me. Hurry up and pack your things. I'll go get the travel documents. We'll leave first thing tomorrow morning. It seems like the emotional knot between the two of them